So recently, a friend of the stream, Nominal Naomi, went viral online when conservatives started a massive social media harassment campaign against her because she, a trans woman, was feeding her baby her breast milk, just like any cis woman who's a mother would do. But conservatives, because they refuse to do any scientific research about the topics they talk about, have been woefully ignorant to the fact that trans women can produce milk from their breasts. They can make breast milk. And so they basically started a moral panic against her, trying to claim that she was like producing some kind of alien pus, I guess, and feeding that to her baby. And they were sending her death threats, trying to have her baby taken from her. They called CPS, which of course investigated and found no wrongdoing. It was basically just a big wake-up call for a bunch of conservatives who probably got exposed to that reality. Oh, wait, what? Trans women can produce breast milk? Because a lot of the conservative, like, game in convincing people that transphobia is valid is lying to people about, like, scientific fact around trans people, right? Like, the more of these little factoids you learn, the more validity there is to, like, the idea that trans women are women. Like, wait, really? Trans women can produce breast milk and, like, breastfeed their own baby? I didn't know that. Because a very common conservative talking point is that a trans mother is fundamentally incapable of providing a baby what it needs to survive, right? And so that throws a wrench in their ideology, and so they had to find a way to attack it aggressively rather than having to go on the defensive and argue why that isn't something that debunks their worldview. And so their way of doing so was mass harassing and sending death threats and all that towards Nominal Naomi. She handled it all very, very well and built herself quite the platform off of all of that drama. And now she does some pretty damn good streams and political content online. And she's gotten pretty big as of late. And she recently did a debate with a woman who is a very loud and proud TERF. Her name is Rachel Twig. She's actually the leader of a PAC. And those of you guys that don't know what a PAC is an organization that funds political movements. Some PACs are good. There are PACs that fund, like, groups that are trying to, like, advocate for the destruction of for-profit prisons, like the abolition of for-profit prisons, and like advocating for abortion rights and contraceptive rights, and like just good things, right? There are plenty of good PACs out there. They're usually grassroots funded, while the bad PACs out there, the conservative ones overall, tend to be funded by like individual organizations that have a lot of money and an individual corporate interest in a certain thing. And the reason why they do this is because they want to have politicians who are in their pocket. You know, it's not really a mystery, you know. And Rachel Twig is actually the leader of a super PAC whose whole goal is to push anti-trans policy. They are literally the ones who are like using their money to try to bribe and fund conservative politicians, like movement to like abolish trans rights. And she's a big time TERF. She is like the leader of a TERF identifying super PAC. And so Nominal Naomi did a debate with her recently, and from what I've heard, destroyed her. So I am very, very, very curious to see how it went. I have not seen any of this debate, so I'm very excited to see how it goes. I noticed there was like a spoiler stinger at the beginning, so I skipped through it because I don't really like those, honestly. I feel like it kind of harms the, at least, reaction experience on my end. But yeah, we're just going to start right from the point where the debate like truly begins, which is like about 30 or 40 seconds into the video. So let's get right into it. There'll, of course, be a link to Nominal Naomi's channel down below in the description, the pinned comment as well.
Go ahead. The floor is yours. You have 7 minutes on the clock.
Okay, sure. So my name is Rachel Twig, and I am the director of a political action committee called Virginia Women Take Action. And our mission is to protect the rights and well-being of women and children by removing gender identity from Virginia laws. And I am interested in this movement in
so basically they are like a like funding campaign group dedicated to like funding the goal of like taking away trans rights. Like they're literally like a money group their goal is raising money to fund the dissolving of trans rights. That's what this lady's job is.
Across the country, but I'm focusing more in Virginia because that's where I live. And our argument is that gender identity as a protected characteristic conflicts with women's rights, and it conflicts with the well-being of children as well. And so we believe that it should be repealed from law, and that women's rights and spaces should be based on sex and not gender identity. So Virginia, we have a big election this year. All of the Senate and House seats are up for grabs. So we're reaching out to candidates who are running for office and asking them to take our pledge. And that's what I'm doing. That's my opening statement.
Okay. Naomi, did you want to respond to any of that? You have 7 minutes on the clock whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I think that it's quite silly to suggest that protecting transgender individuals' rights and access to public accommodations, non-discrimination protections, etc., is at odds with women's rights in any kind of way. Literally all available empirical evidence we have on spaces that are separated by gender shows that trans people are disproportionately victims of violence in those spaces,
Male
not the
spaces, yeah.
perpetrators.
In male spaces, like a trans woman is far more likely to be a victim of violence in a male space than a cis woman is to be a victim of violence in a female space occupied by a trans woman. And on top of that, the same goes for trans men as well in female spaces in many cases. Like the argument that like trans people are dangerous is just not true. Trans people are not in any way disproportionately dangerous demographic. I think anyone who's spent any time on like Twitter would probably know this, because like most like trans people probably like can't talk to the cashier without sweating and like having to plan out everything they're gonna say, and then when like the cashier says enjoy your food, they say you too. Oh fuck. That's like most trans people. They're not the most dangerous people, you know. they're not out there looking to kill anybody.
And yet, when we pass non-discrimination clauses to protect trans people's access to spaces, for example, there is no increase in assaults or privacy violations in any of those spaces. This is backed up by the peer-reviewed literature, which I'm happy to cite. And yeah, we'd love to have a good faith discussion about the actual data behind this.
With that, the floor is open. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I guess I would just start off by asking, like, do you acknowledge the data that exists, which shows that trans women are disproportionately victims, not perpetrators, of violence, assault, privacy violations in these kind of spaces?
I mean, I'm not familiar with what was you said the purity statement. What was that?
Peer-reviewed data. Do you know what peer review is?
Oh, pure. Yeah. I thought you said purity. Okay, yeah, peer-reviewed. I mean, I would say that having
she's not going to have a valid response to this
in places for women, even if assault doesn't.
She's going to try to move the goalpost here. There is no valid response to, hey, why is your entire movement and ideology stand in stark contrast to what all of the experts believe? Like, there's no... You can't argue yourself out of that corner without just moving the goalpost and trying to, like, move the conversation to something else. I'm pretty certain Nominal Naomi is not going to let her slide off of this. That is truly the, like, be-all, end-all of a debate against a transphobe that you could possibly have, is why does your position fundamentally disagree with what people who have, like, massive communities of scientists, psychologists, and academic lifelong professionals, why does your opinion not align with theirs? And why are you not only unwilling to adapt to that position, but to even hear it out in any way that isn't blatant straw manning and mockery? Like, it's understanding if you don't want to just listen to the experts and adopt their opinion just outright without any more thought than that. That's understandable, I suppose, but that's not what I'm talking about here. They just outright refuse to trust or listen to any of the verified experts on any of these topics, whether it be climate change or COVID or trans people or anything. They don't agree with science fundamentally. They never have. Evolution
doesn't happen. It's still a violation.
The shape of the earth.
Privacy. And,
okay, so to be clear, you don't care about like if there's data that exists. Like to you, it's just about like your feelings, not about the data.
I'd say gender identity is a feeling and not based on data.
We have data on gender identity.
But but like,
I'm
okay,
happy to go into that.
let's sure. Okay, let's start with your question first.
Already
or your
blustered.
assertion.
Already flustered. So yeah, this woman clearly did not expect to be confronted by a trans person who knows what they're talking about. Like a lot of conservative propaganda is centered around the belittling of trans people as being like really like dumb and emotional and poor at arguing, and you know, like a lot of conservative propaganda like is based on the fundamental you know, assumption from the start that everything they believe is correct by default. They don't even entertain the possibility anything they believe is wrong. Like ever, which is why whenever one of them gets into a debate with a trans person who's like, let's bring up some studies, they're like, what? And they have to come up with like a very convenient excuse for why none of the data aligns with what they say the data says. Because that's the thing. It's not just them saying, I believe this, and this is what's true, and the facts are on my side. It's them arguing that the studies and the experts are on their side. And then when confronted that's not the case, they say, well, the experts I've found are on my side. And then when you ask them to list the experts, they can't. Or it's like that lady that thinks that COVID was caused by demon cum. That was like the Trump-endorsed doctor who is like, they have been infected by demons. They transmit through the gay sex, demons in the semen. It's like, I forget exactly what the quote was, but it was just batshit, you know? Like, it'll be some, like, completely batshit, like, long, disowned by the scientific community doctor that'll be their expert.
So you're saying that, quote, trans people, and I would just say men,
Yeah,
are
semen demons.
disproportionately affected by violence if they're forced to use male spaces. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, this is what's backed up by the peer-reviewed literature.
Okay.
Yes.
And I don't doubt necessarily that an effeminate man or a man wearing a dress or something might be subjected to harassment or violence. And I do not condone that at all. But my argument is that the solution is not to put men in women's places or spaces. This is a male on male problem, male on male violence, and it's not for women to solve or fix.
Not a real feminist, by the way.
More than just like cis men on trans.
Remember, guys, not a real feminist, and TERFs hate men. If you are a cis man, no, TERFs hate you. If you, like, identify with TERFs and ally with them on the premise that, like, you both agree on your hatred of trans people, just know their hatred of trans people is driven by the fact that they see trans women as men, and they hate men. That is literally all that motivates them. They hate you. If you, like, Glinner, for example, the, like, self-hating, like, hyper, like, soy, divorced, British, like, limey, cuck, TERF boy that's, like, been shunned and like, ostracized by the TERF community that he's so desperate to be accepted by. Like, they'll never accept you. They hate you for your gender. In the same way that, like, a misogynist hates women, and there's nothing you can do to argue him out of that most of the time, like a truly emotionally driven misogynist. The same goes for TERFs. Most of them have, like, I'm not gonna lie, a lot of TERFs have been victims of sexual assault, and that's what motivates their hatred of men. And it's not a valid reason to hate men. I'm sorry, but having been raped is not a valid reason to hate an entire, like, group of people. It's just not. It's not an excuse.
Trans women. There was a study from pediatrics which found that the rate was also higher of, like, sexual assaults in bathrooms, for example, in transgender boys, as well as non-binary people and trans women, and that actually when schools passed policies which would restrict bathroom access for transgender people, the rate of sexual assault went up drastically. Schools that had restroom and locker room restrictions for trans people were associated with a 1.26 times risk of sexual assault for transgender boys.
Mm-hmm.
It was 1.42 times the increased risk
hard.
for non-binary youth, and 2.49 times the risk for transgender girls. I'm happy to cite the study. It was in the Pediatrics Journal, School Restroom and Locker Restrictions and Sexual Assault Risk Among Transgender Youth.
Naomi,
So-
you can link that in the private chat. That way, Rachel can pull it up if she needs to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
happy to
mean,
cite that.
I'll look at anything, but again, and I guess this is going to be
I'll
the
look
real
at anything.
argument
That
is-
means nothing.
My argument is that these spaces are based on sex. So if these assaults are happening to boys or men, it's unfortunate and I don't condone it, but
But you're not going to do anything to
women's
stop
space-
it.
It's not my problem to deal with. It's not women's problem.
Not just you won't do anything to stop it, you'll actively fight against any effort to stop it. That's how I would word it. You're not acting neutrally. You're not acting as somebody who's a bystander refusing to act, who can use the excuse of it's not my problem. You are actively acting to fight against efforts to improve this situation. You are going out of your way. You are doing hard work in order to fight against efforts to improve the lives of trans people. That is how I'd word it personally. Just a nitpick, but I think it helps to preemptively keep her from trying to argue that. Something that I think is really... I'm going to be honest with you guys. One of the things that I think is just the biggest debate, improvement to debate skill that you can get is just, filling yourself with conservative, arguments. Learning every conservative argument, being up to date with their talking points and their conspiracies, and knowing, at the core fundamental, why are they arguing this? What is their end goal in arguing this bogus point they're making? And once you've got that down, you can generally, meta dismantle their arguments pretty well.
To deal with.
That's quite
male
heinous
on male.
because here's the thing. I care about women that are assaulted or having their privacy violated in these spaces. I think that people who are genuinely committing assaults or privacy violations should be dealt with. But the kind of policies you're advocating for literally result in more assaults and privacy violations. And you're just saying it's not your problem. It sounds like you really don't care about victims.
Yep.
I care about women. And what I'm saying is that
and only
it
Women,
is a
not
privacy-
victims.
Women and girls, okay? I care about women and girls. And I would say that,
Pure
like I
evil.
said earlier, just having a man in a space for women and girls.
It's literally
a
woman
locker room,
supremacy.
For example, even if an assault doesn't happen, it is still a violation. It is still a form of...
One of the most common things you'll see on Twitter, by the way, is TERFs fantasizing about men being raped in prison. The prevalence of prison rape is one of the most beloved topics for TERFs to joke about. One of the most you know how internet dude bros online have Z's and he's their hero. The equivalent to Z's for femcel TERF women is Judy Arias, I think her name is, who's a woman that murdered her ex-boyfriend because he broke up with her. She was obsessed with him and messaged him for weeks and weeks and weeks, desperate to be in a relationship with him, but he very healthily and clearly cut it off. He didn't do anything wrong. And so she went into his house while he was taking a shower and stabbed him to death, and was caught because her camera was on. She'd accidentally taken a photo, or his camera was on or something. The femcel community online, they worship her. They make memes about her being a hero. They use her as their profile picture on Twitter. You'll see that pretty often. They fantasize about men getting raped in prisons. They fantasize about murdering men, and they see men who dare to break up with a woman, or literally no matter how morally justified or how awful a thing a woman did, if a man does something that causes a woman misfortune, such as breaking up with her and her being upset about it, then they will celebrate that man's death if that girl's response is to girl boss a knife into the guy's chest while he's taking a shower. They'll be all for it. It's truly just demonic hatred that drives their politics.
Sexual harassment.
Wait, how is that a violation? How is that sexual harassment?
Because you're forcing girls to undress and be exposed in front of boys without their consent.
There's private stalls for this. I have never once seen someone's genitals when I go to the bathroom, because I just go in my own stall and mind my own business. This is literally not a problem.
I'm talking about locker.
Yeah, also, as somebody who, listen, I can consider myself a locker room expert, my friends, okay? I was on the swim team through probably through a quarter of my life. As it stands, I've spent on the swim team, going to swim practice pretty much every day of the week, 5 days a week, for 3 hours. So I've been to a lot of swim meets in different locations, at famous pools all across Florida and less famous ones, all of them having locker rooms that were actively being used by many people because the swim event was actively happening, okay? And the way every single one of those locker rooms worked was, yeah, you could be the weirdo that just kind of like, you know, just free balls it out in front of everybody in the main locker room area, but pretty much everybody goes into a stall to change because they're not weird and they don't want to just like swing their cock around in every other dude's face, right? I imagine it's much the same in women's locker rooms. Like there's stalls for if you want to like just chill out there, but there's also like the outdoor area for women to just have their titties out with each other or whatever. But like, yeah, like if you're uncomfortable being seen by a quote unquote male, then just do your locker room business inside of the stall like everybody else does. This is literally a made-up issue. This issue is fabricated. It is made up. It is not real. It is something that like is conceptually worrying to people who don't really think about it for long, because they are bought into the idea that trans women are just men, and they are also maybe susceptible to the idea that all men are secretly perverted sex freaks that are a danger to women, which I'll let you decide what that says about them, especially if they're a man. And so they buy into that just off the bat because it's sort of a, like, oh, it's a street smarts, you just kind of know that to be true kind of position to have, that a lot of people just kind of like, you know, say they just kind of know, right? Like, I don't really know how else to say it other than there's just a lot of people out there that feel like they just know. Does that make sense? How many people have you met out there that are literally unwilling to accept any new idea because they feel like they just know? Because they're just so intuitively gifted at understanding the world that they just get it. And they think the world just fundamentally makes sense to them, and that when they see something, their big logical brain just automatically formulates the perfect opinion. And they will not hear any data, any evidence, anything, any argument, nothing that goes against the narrative that they've come up for themselves, or more likely been taught by somebody and have rationalized themselves into believing is a valid argument. It's very common. And this isn't even like a hardcore conservative thing. This is more of like your average like boomer, like chud-esque kind of dude, bro. Like your buddy Philip on Facebook believes this kind of shit, and that's how your like arguments with him go, you know? I just thought up like the most like what's like the most like your bro and who's like still a conservative kind of name. Philip. Yeah, that's the kind of name. I can't stand Philip. I guess people in chat have a Philip, okay? I guess I was like on par with that.
Locker rooms too, where you are more undressed, and even if it's not seeing genitals, you're in your underwear, you're exposed, and I'm okay in a room with other women.
How is it not sexual harassment for like women to be exposed to other women then?
Because we're fine with each other.
That makes no sense.
We're fine with each other. We don't care because we're not a threat to each other. Not on like a large scale. Not on the same.
Trans women aren't a threat to cis women either. That's what all the data shows.
Are.
Like I was telling you.
How are they a threat?
My question is: is it about whether or not there's an actual threat?
She forgot that she's already had to goalpost concede that trans women aren't an actual physical threat to cis women, and she tried to bring it back around to that argument because she didn't think before she talked, and now she sits back, and you can see the look on her face is like, she realizes what a mistake she just made. Look at her face. Look at Rachel Twig's face. She's literally got her eyes closed, and she's like sighing because she realizes she fell into the trap. She forgot that she'd already conceded the reality that trans women are not a threat to cis women, and that trans women are actually in more danger in the presence of men.
Or is it about whether or not like you feel afraid? Because all data shows there's no actual threat. But is this just about your feelings?
I think that's patronizing to say it's just your feelings, because we
no.
could see throughout human history
that's what you say to trans people.
Of course, not all men, but the perpetrators of sexual violence and assault are men. For the most part, it's men.
Right, men.
And because of
not
that,
trans women.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to get kicked off YouTube for saying what I want to say, but I would not say that trans women are women. So
okay, but
no
if
shit.
you look at the actual data, trans women are not the ones that are responsible for the assaults and privacy violations that are occurring in these spaces.
Hang on,
So like, it's not the threat you need to
Naomi.
be worried about.
Naomi, I don't mean to cut in, but it looks like your camera froze up.
Ooh,
Okay,
yeah.
well, I have a question to that.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
okay, you say that it's not quote trans women who are committing the assaults. So, if I were to say, like, okay, I'm in Virginia, Loudoun County made big news across the country. I don't know if you two are familiar with it, about 2 girls who were sexually assaulted in their school bathrooms by a boy
Anecdotal.
wearing a dress.
Okay.
And there are examples of women who've been sexually assaulted in prison by quote trans women, to use
Okay,
your
those
language.
people should be charged.
Or-
Absolutely.
But okay, but let me finish. Let me finish my thought.
Oh,
Or
okay,
like, like, or have you heard of?
Once again, we're getting an argument here. They need to make crime illegal. She's advocating for crime to be made illegal right now. That's how stupid she is. She doesn't realize it, but she's saying they should make crime illegal. It already is illegal to sexually assault people. You're literally talking about a story of someone being charged with sexual assault. So, when there is no data to back up your worldview, you inevitably have to fall back onto individual anecdotes. There are nearly 8 billion people on this planet, all of different races, creeds, sexual identities, gender identities, etc. Inevitably, you're going to find a trans person who is a sexual harasser or assaulter. You're going to find a black person who does violent crime. Any racist, Nazi, bigot, whatever it may be, of any shape or size will be able to find anecdotal examples of insert minority they hate and want to demonize doing bad thing they claim all those minorities do. Because that is how the world works. There's too many people for that not to have happened. The fact that one person in that group ever has done it is not a compelling argument, especially when Naomi is bringing data to the table, actual statistics. What matters is the actual data and the fact that there is a very stark statistical difference between the rates of violence committed by trans women and the rates of violence committed by men. When this woman tries to argue that trans women are a danger because yada 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 men are violent, she is once again forgetting that Naomi has brought up data that shows, well, if you look up the violence statistics and you separate trans women from men, it turns out the men are the ones doing the violence, not the trans women. So it's clear that, your fears of this group are not valid. Let's talk about why you think they shouldn't be in these spaces. And she'll say, well, they're not the same. It's like, okay, but you started your argument by saying it's a danger. And now she's trying to argue that her feelings are valid as an argument.
Like the Wee Spa incident where the man was walking around with an erection. So my question, this all comes to, how do we know
Sometimes
the
you
bad
can't make it go away.
actors? Like the people that are committing assaults and are violating women in these spaces.
How much you want to bet this turf doesn't believe no reason boners are real? I do notice a lot. You see turfs very often on social media, unironically believing that certain medical things that happen to males in particular aren't real. Obviously the most common one is the idea that blue balls isn't real. Obviously you've got dude bros who will say, you gotta finish me off, I've got blue balls, I'm gonna die. That's not a thing, but it is a painful thing that happens if you go too long and without nutting. That's usually how it happens to me, is I'll lose track of time and realize, oh, it's been a while, and then all of a sudden pain starts to set in, but it's already too late, because it's oh, okay, well, I'm literally in too much pain to continue now. So yeah, that's usually how it'll go about, but it's a real thing. It's unironically real, blue balls is, and you'll see turfs claiming it's not a real thing, and it's made up by men as an excuse to sexually harass or assault women, and it's no, it's just when you have a boner for too long and you don't nut. It usually happens when you have sex for too long. It feels like the best way to describe how it feels is obviously your balls hurt. That's obvious, a very deep, painful ache in your balls. But then also it feels like you're going to it feels like a very deep, painful stomach rumbling kind of if you've ever had a really bad stomach issue where you feel like you're gonna shit badly, it feels almost like that when it's coming on. We have this deep, warm, achy pain in your guts, and that's that kind of sticks around for a while. Usually I just pass out and I wake up feeling fine in the morning, but yeah. I've seen turfs unironically argue that's just not real. They'll argue that A lot of those things, like no reason boners aren't real, so I wouldn't be surprised that that story was literally just like some person posted on social media that there was a trans woman who had like a bulge or something. Oh, Kyanus is here. Yo. I'm actually just now finishing up the excavation here, but if you could keep these guardians off my back, it would help a lot, because they are being pretty rough right now. I keep having to swim away and consume a gap so I don't die. Kyanus, no, don't die.
You would argue that those aren't trans women. Are they bad
Well,
acting
anybody
men?
is
Like, how are
capable
we?
of committing sexual assault or a privacy violation, regardless of if they're a cis man, a trans woman, or a cis woman. And those who do commit assault or privacy violations should be tried as criminals. But largely speaking, trans women are not the people that you should be worried about. And trying to exclude the group that statistically is not any more likely to commit these crimes seems based on nothing but bigotry, fear-mongering, and feelings.
Yep.
And not any
Well,
kind
who
of like
should be-
data.
Who should we be worried about then? Like, when we have spaces for women and girls, and you would say that trans
Conservative
women should be able
men.
to access those spaces for their own safety, whatever. Who should we be afraid of then?
So typically it would be cisgender men that are the most likely to commit these kinds of assaults. However,
Okay.
you know, the data we
Go ahead,
have on
keep
like
going.
gender neutral spaces, for example, shows that assault and privacy violations are actually not any more common in gender neutral spaces as compared to like women's only spaces.
Okay, I mean, I don't have a big problem with gender neutral spaces, but I do believe in
I would actually argue that assault is going to be far less common, especially against women in gender-neutral spaces. How many times, like, I mean, there's literally data on this that we could bring up, but there's also video representations of this that we could watch, but I don't think I can tab out right now for very obvious reasons. But it's basically like those videos where you'll have like they'll set up the premise, right? The guy is, like the first scenario will be a guy and a girl are in a park or something like that, right? In a public environment. And the guy is screaming at the girl, like on the verge of maybe hitting her. Like, that's how mad he is. And within seconds, a crowd of men, usually, come to defend the woman and like, get the guy away. Like, they don't care why the guy's upset. They are like not okay with the guy being upset at this woman. And then they do another scenario where they act out another scenario where the woman is screaming. Honestly, it seemed even more likely that violence was going to occur caused by the woman towards the man. They flip the scenario. Not a single person stops. There's even like a woman who stops to ask the woman what he did and like cheers her on and says like, "You go, girl." And it wasn't a faked video. It was like a pretty legit like channel that did the social experiment. But there's been like actual like studies, like colleges have run this study as well. They've done blind studies with this to try and like see, do we sociologically move to help women in public situations like that more so than we'd ever help a man? Will we just let a man get assaulted by a woman in public and just like say, "Oh, I guess he deserved it"? And the truth is, yes, in public, when a woman assaults a man, people are way more likely to assume that the man must have done something to deserve it, while vice versa, within an instant, usually there is a man there to stop violence happening against a woman if a man sees it. Every guy wants to be the hero that stops a woman from getting assaulted by a dude, you know? Not so much the other way around. Like, if a guy is getting bullied by another guy, it's usually like, well, that's their business, you know? If he's too weak to defend himself, then that's his problem, is generally the mindset. And that's the mindset this woman also wants to enforce because she's not an actual feminist.
protecting women's spaces. So my question is, how do you tell the difference between a quote cis man and who might just want to put on a dress and come in and a quote trans woman? How are we supposed to know?
Well, I don't think you really need to tell the difference. But if somebody's doing
Yeah, we
something
do. If
inappropriate,
we're talking about,
if someone's doing something
if we're-
inappropriate, then you try them as a criminal. But if someone's not doing anything inappropriate, then I don't think it's your right to like ask them to show you their genitals or something.
and I'm not asking that, but I can tell who a man is.
This is America.
And
Okay, I guess
again,
my question is, if you're not asking people to like show their genitals, like how do you expect to enforce, like say bathrooms, for example, enforce like a single sex space in bathrooms?
well, that's how it's always been up until so
No, it has
gender
not
identity
been.
was-
Existed for all of human history, and they've been using
Yeah,
the
yeah,
bathroom
but
without
bef-
people noticing for this entire time.
Bathroom
So, like, how do you
segregation
expect
is
to
very
enforce this kind of
new.
policy?
And they were breaking the law back then too, because those
What?
spaces were separated by sex.
But
So
they
yeah,
weren't breaking the law.
I'm sure men have been sneaking into women's spaces for as long as women's spaces have existed,
what-
and I'm sure they haven't always been noticed.
You're still dodging the
But
question. Like,
when
I'm
they-
curious
She
how you
doesn't
expect to enforce this kind of
understand.
policy.
Sure,
just
sure.
fundamentally
So when
doesn't
they were
get it.
noticed, they could be charged. We could say, hey, there's a man in the locker room, there's a man in the women's bathroom, and then he'd be arrested and charged with voyeurism or whatever.
So
It
you
was
just
a
want
sexual
people to like
offense.
guess who isn't trans and then arrest people on suspicion of being trans?
Is
I think we
voyeurism
can
a
guess
crime?
who's
I thought that's
men
just the name
and
of
who
a
are the women.
So-
like
So
fetish.
yeah, that's why
This
I
is
would
never
remove
gonna be
gender
a, this is
identity.
never going to be a 100% accurate process. And the history of trying to guess whether or not somebody is like truly a man or truly a woman is backed with a lengthy history of discrimination against intersex people, also discrimination against women of color. Were particularly framed as being like too masculine. This was actually an issue in women's sports, where like there was attempts to keep black women out of women's sports because they were seen as too masculine. And so it's just like
Happening
this
now,
kind of
where
enforcement
black
based
women
off
are
of people's
setting off
suspicion
the,
is just going to lead to crazy
on.
fear mongering, which we have seen in practice
So-
leads to false reports all the time.
There's been instances lately where there have been black female athletes who have had the limit on what. So they set what is the standard level of estrogen and standard limit of testosterone that a cis woman should have, and they base it off of the predominantly white female athletes, which means that is the average amount of estrogen and testosterone for a white female athlete, which means a fair amount of black female athletes will actually go over that, because not everybody is the same, and there are like different hormonal balance difference across different populations of people because humans are pretty diverse. And the outcome of a lot of these like hormone limiting policies have actually had a negative effect against black women trying to get into women's sports because they have actually set off the alarms.
People getting like misidentified, and like then what? What do you expect to happen? Like a police officer expects someone's genitals or something? Like how?
Not
how do you
expect
expect this to
somebody's
happen?
genitals. Well, and I feel like the race argument, let me bring that up. Like that discrimination was based on race. And, you know, I'm not sure how old you are, but you look young enough that this is before our generation.
She's a
and the
mother.
Civil rights.
I think that
solved that,
racism
not
is still
perfect-
well and alive
not
today,
perfectly.
and also
Yeah,
leads to
not
black
Why are
women
you
perceived
trying
as
to
more
age
masculine
mog
than white women? Which
someone
means
who's
that
a
these kinds of
literal
policies
mom?
will disproportionately affect black women.
Oh
Even
no,
today.
hang on, Naomi. Let Rachel respond to the original
go for it.
question. Go ahead.
Okay, so anyway, where was I going with that thought? But yeah, but it's like race is different than sex.
I agree.
And we can tell, like, I mean, I just think
It's not the same as
you
being
said
a
my initial
raging
argument was
racist
silly. I
bigot.
think it's silly
It's
to
not the
pretend that we
same as the
can't
thing that
accurately
society has
tell
already agreed is
sex,
wrong.
like,
My
99%
bigotry
of
is not
time.
the
Yeah,
same
it's
as
not
the
always
already
clear. I will
completely
say that.
socially
It's not
agreed
always
upon as
clear
being
with
bad
My
bigotry.
problem with your enforcement mechanism isn't the 99%. My problem with your enforcement
Uh-huh.
mechanism is the 1%. I don't want that 1% to be unjustly discriminated against, but you're fine with that, and that's a problem.
Well, I would say like it would have to come back to two ideas off the top of my head is if you have identification, but now the law says that men can have female as their identification marker.
You
So we
want
need
someone
to
like
repeal
checking
that
people's
too.
IDs at the doors to bathrooms?
Not at the
How do you
doors to the
verify it?
bathrooms, but if I notice a man in the bathroom, I should be able to say, hey, there's a man in here and he should be able to be thrown out.
Oh my
by
god,
security or
imagine.
whoever or police or whatever.
Dude, imagine like how many videos would come out of like how many women have you seen before who like TERFs would absolutely accuse of being trans and report to like a security guard or a police officer? Like if that was actually a law they could do. Could you imagine the amount of Karen calls police on cis women like it would happen? You know what's even funnier as well? Like all of this is so ridiculous when you consider that like literally every mother of a son has taken her son into the women's bathroom with her. Like it's not even like I've been in tons of women's bathrooms when I was like 7 or 8 years old and younger, and my mom would take me to places and had to use the bathroom and couldn't just leave me out like in public for someone to just kidnap and had to have me by her side. So I'd like have to sit by the sink, like in the public bathroom. I just like sit by the door or whatever. But like no one cared or batted an eye. It's not unusual for moms to take their young boy into the bathroom because they can't leave their kid unattended, and no one considers that a problem. Obviously, no one considers a young boy a threat, but, like, the idea that these are exclusively sacredly women's spaces where, like, no males are ever allowed under any circumstances because it's, like, super, like, private and special or something is ridiculous. It's fucking ridiculous. Like, even women's bathrooms and women's locker rooms are an appropriate enough environment for even, like, an 8-year-old boy to be in, and it's not a big deal. It's obvious that this is a completely fabricated moral panic. There's no substance to any of these worries or complaints at all.
Whatever needs to be done.
I mean, this seems pretty invasive, but like trans people can obtain IDs that are transitioned. So I mean, like that would still include.
Yeah, I know
trans
that,
people.
and I disagree with that. I think that if you shouldn't be able to put female on your birth certificate if you're a man, or vice versa. Women shouldn't be able to put male down on their birth certificate or on their driver's license. I mean.
Okay, well, we live in a world where that is a thing, so this doesn't really solve
and that's
the
my goal.
Mechanism.
Well, my goal is to remove that from law. I don't think that should be in the law anymore. I think we need to repeal that.
You want to make it
your
illegal.
Enforcement mechanism doesn't work unless we like manually go through and vet all of like trans people's IDs. But also, this doesn't solve the problem with like intersex people. Intersex people might have a very complicated situation. With respect to like an ID and their gender presentation and their observable sex characteristics, like there's still going to be people that are going to be unjustly.
She's going to try to argue intersex people are a genetic anomaly or something like that. Conservatives really hate when you bring up intersex people because it's like, wait, there isn't just XX and XY chromosomes. And also when there isn't just those, it tends to have like a very obvious physical like impact where there's also not just penis and vagina usually, or just uterus or testes. Like the existence of those people is such a inarguable debunking of their entire worldview that they get really desperate to try to argue for invalidating factors for the existence of them. Like, oh, they're a mistake. They're a genetic anomaly. It's like, says who? They exist. That's not how it works. You can't just say they're not supposed to exist, they're a mistake, and so they don't. It doesn't apply. Like that's not a valid, like a sound argument.
Discriminated against and targeted based on this policy.
Nature is never wrong.
Crazy lengths of trying to remove.
Nature is never wrong. There's no oughts in nature, guys. Things aren't supposed to be a certain way in nature or evolution. Humans aren't supposed to be a certain way. There's not a supposed to be state for humans that's like ideal for. I mean, there might be an ideal state for humans that we'd be most happy in and most fulfilled in, but there's not a thing we're supposed to do that evolution wants us to do. There are things like it's all random. It's all just what happens. That's it. There's no thing that you're supposed to do evolutionarily as a human. We are humans who have like very advanced brains, and we have done our best to try to make sense of the world. And we have decided that we've personified evolution a lot. We've personified evolution to a potentially unhealthy degree, where we talk about evolution like it made a thing happen. Evolution wanted a thing to happen. That's not how it works. It's completely random. And the randomness has certain outcomes that occur, and we occurred out of that randomness.
All trans people from
There's not supposed to be two sets of chromosome or two different chromosome pairs. There's not supposed to be two genders. These are things that we've just decided. And when things go outside of that norm, we've decided to call it weird or unusual or against the norm or against what's supposed to be the case. We just decided that. There's no written in stone law that says so, unless you're religious and you believe that the book of that supposedly God wrote says so, in which case, I mean, you do you.
From IDs or whatever, like, you're still going to encounter problems. This enforcement mechanism just isn't good.
Okay, well, and intersex people are still male or female. They're still
How do
male
you
or
tell?
female.
Oh, brown Mushu.
I mean, it's not always, like
Nice.
I said, you can't always tell perfectly, but you can usually tell. And
Well, how do you tell
like,
what gender or sex
we could
like, an
always
intersex
tell.
person should be in your view?
I don't know. I guess you just have
You don't
to
know.
ask them.
Okay, so
can't.
you just don't know how
You
to
would just
handle
you
this
just
portion of
ask.
the
Look, this is
population.
what I'm willing
No.
to do.
Oh,
I would
Well, now you want to be able to ask, but you're making it illegal for them to but like it's literally incoherent. What she's advocating for is incoherent and driven by hatred. There's no actual realistic way you could practically apply this policy, and if it ever did get applied, it would be like nightmarish for an unbelievable amount of people. who are like completely normal, perfectly good people.
You actually just figured it out. You're right. You just ask what somebody identifies as, and then it's literally no problem. Thank you.
Don't
That's
care
exactly
how you
the solution.
identify. I don't care how
figured
you
it out.
identify. I want you to know. I want to know if you're male or female.
Okay.
And I can usually
And you
tell,
said
like,
that with
I've
an
seen,
intersex person, you can just ask. Why can't that just be true for like
No,
everyone?
Naomi, hang on.
I will say, go ahead.
I just want to make sure when you ask a question, try to give Rachel enough time to answer it.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I'm sorry, I lose my train of thought sometime. But yeah, we were talking about intersex people and how do you know, how do you ask? Yeah, well, look, I'll just tell you, like, I've seen men in locker rooms, I've seen men in bathrooms, and I can tell. And I just ask them to leave, and that's it. I haven't noticed an intersex person.
Dude, she's asked trans people to leave locker rooms and bathrooms. When she says she's seen men in the locker room, she's talking about trans women. TERFs will refuse to say the word trans women. They're literally so ideologically like dishonest. They are unwilling to engage with they're so unwilling to like bear with you and actually engage that they refuse to even use the term trans woman. They will exclusively refer to trans women as men. They won't even use trans women for like the ease of like description in an argument. They'll just only ever refer to trans women as men.
And I do understand.
Because they're not, it's not a logical worldview they have. It's more of a religious one. It's more about adhering to an ideological purity of TERFism rather than like caring about like accurately describing things for the sake of having a productive conversation.
And admit that mistakes might happen. I might accidentally look at a woman who's a woman and say, oh, I'm willing to admit that could happen, but I think it's worthwhile to protect women's spaces.
Well, who are you protecting at that point? If a trans person is
women and girls.
If a trans person is not causing any kind of like privacy violation or there's no like assault, yet you are actively harassing women by mistake.
Yeah, once again, crime is already illegal. There's no realistic way you can prevent crime in this way. Like, what she's advocating for is banning trans women from women's bathrooms, but the only realistic way to do that is to have armed guards outside of bathrooms, I suppose, or for cis women to be able to report trans women for being in the bathroom, but the only way they'd be able to report that is if that trans woman had already committed a crime. So what they're basically advocating for is a pointless law that would realistically do nothing, but would on paper specifically discriminate against trans people and refer to them as a threat specifically on legal paper against women. Even though there's no actual data or studies that prove this, if they can make it so that there is a law, even one they specifically made happen, that says that trans women, or suggests that trans women are a danger to cis women, then they can use that as an argument. Because they literally believe the law. They believe might makes right. So if they can say a thing is illegal, then that's all the argument they need. She's already made this argument that, like, something being illegal makes it morally wrong.
Which you admitted will happen. I mean, at that point, it seems like you're just causing harassment in bathrooms over something that's not an actual physical, tangible harm.
But like I've said, it doesn't matter if an assault happens or not. Just having a man in the
of course
space
it doesn't
that's
matter.
just for women is a violation.
A violation of
what?
Of privacy, and it's voyeurism. This used to be
how?
Crime.
Men existing in a woman's space is voyeurism. Voyeurism, by the way, is when you have sex or jack off in public. So, like, really stretching that definition there to the extent where you're just wrong.
Voyeurism. They're just going to the bathroom.
Well, what about in like locker rooms where you're undressing?
So
or in
just,
women's
like,
prisons
and minding their own business.
Voyeurism is explicitly sexual, so she is unwilling to engage with the reality that when a trans woman uses the bathroom or goes to the locker room to change or something, that it isn't a sexual thing.
Business? How is that voyeurism?
Because I'm undressing too, and I do not consent to undressing
in
front of a man that I don't know.
What exactly do you mean by like voyeurism?
Like looking at somebody inappropriately. I mean, I can pull
That's
up
not
the exact
what voyeurism
definition
is.
of the word of like
That
the
is
law.
not
So wait, you're just
voyeurism.
assuming that like trans people are by default going to be looking at women inappropriately in the bathroom or in the locker room?
I think predatory men find ways to do that. Yes.
Are we talking
how
about
would-
trans women, or are we talking about...
Okay, if predatory men, which she means trans women, if predatory men find a way, then how would you making it illegal for them to go into, like, it literally makes no sense. Like, it's illegal. You can't in America prosecute a crime before it's happened. If a sex crime happens in a woman's bathroom, it will be prosecuted. It's as simple as that. This is literally a nothing argument. She's literally just trying to advocate for the law to say trans women are a threat to women, so they have something to point to that seems official. They don't have data, they don't have studies, they don't have research. There's no actual, like, data or facts to pull from. But if they can say, look, this law says that trans women are probably a danger to cis women, because it bans them from being, like, then they can just point to that as justification for their policy, even though that policy was literally pushed by them. Like, they will literally create the justification for their beliefs.
about predatory men, because I'm all for, if predatory men are, you know, like, taking pictures of people doing inappropriate things, they should be tried. But, like, just a trans
And I would
person...
say the same
just
thing
a
if women do
here's
that
the
to each
problem,
other.
here's the problem. You keep on, like, jumping to different points. Where it's like, if we just have a trans woman who's just, say, like, going to the bathroom, or just minding her own business, changing in her stall, and then leaving, that's not voyeurism. So where's the problem?
Because he could still see women undressing.
The funny thing about transphobia, by the way, is it's harder than not being transphobic. It genuinely is harder to be transphobic than not. At a certain point, you have to actively put in a certain amount of effort when having conversations about, like, for example, you will see transphobes have conversations about Blair White and have to repeatedly correct themselves from saying she. There are a lot of trans people, like, at a certain point, like, particularly trans people who pass really well, where it's, like, actually really hard to refer to them not as she, her, because your brain just defaults to it, because that's, you're used to assuming, and your brain insta assumes, and so that's really common with particularly, like, really well passing trans people.
Or in, like I said,
People see women
taking their
undress all
clothes
the
off.
time. That's not a problem. Women see women undress.
Yeah, women see each other undress, and we consent to being in a space with other women. We don't consent to men being in those spaces.
Speaking for every woman
Well, I mean,
ever,
you have
by
a
the
choice
way.
to enter that space, and if you're going into, like, a place that has a trans
I
inclusive
choose-
policy, you are thus consenting to the potential that trans people might be in there. That's just the nature of
Yeah,
using public accommodations. Like, you are
Well, and
consenting
I
to that by agreeing to go into a space like that.
I understand that, but
Like, if
having
you don't
this,
consent to seeing trans women, you can just use, like, a gender-neutral space.
Hang on, you got to give Rachel an opportunity to respond.
I am saying these spaces were designed for women. And when you have gender identity protected, then that space is no longer safe for women. And so women
How is
don't
it
feel
unsafe for
comfortable
women?
using. Because I just explained you're undressing in front
All
of
right,
men.
I'm just gonna
That's
leave
not
the
a
raid,
safety
like,
concern.
undone.
That's not a
Yes,
safety
it
while
is.
there's
concern.
two guys left.
Do you
Let's
think
not kill
that
the rest.
women or girls should have to undress in front of people that they're not comfortable with?
Loaded
So if
question.
you're uncomfortable in dressing
False
in front of
premise.
someone, then you should find...
Loaded question, false premise. No one is saying anyone should have to do anything. She is actively arguing that freedom should be taken away, and Naomi is arguing that freedom should not be taken away. The onus is on Rachel Twig to make an argument for why that freedom should be taken.
Your own space, your own private stall where you can do that.
That was what the women's space was for.
No,
women's
it's not.
spaces
You have
were
to
so
undress,
that-
you
yes,
have to
it
undress
is.
in front of other women in that space.
Yeah,
It's
but
not just
we're
for you.
comfortable with
It's for-
that.
it's
no,
for
I
all
know.
of those
I know it's
women.
not just for. Yeah,
Why
it's
is
just
she
for all of
speaking
us,
for
and I
every
would say
woman?
that trans
I
women
know
are
for a
men and do
fact-
not belong in those spaces.
I know for a fact there are many women who are not comfortable getting undressed in front of other women. I know I joke about how women love seeing each other's titties and all that, and they do, but also not really. Like, it's a meme. The vast majority of women are just as, like, opposed to being naked in front of other people in public as any guy, I think.
I guess,
it's
like,
just for women.
My problem is that, like, there's just a long history of this exact same kind of argument being used to justify discrimination against minorities. I guess, okay, if I'm characterizing you correctly, make sure I'm not misrepresenting you. You're saying that, like, if a group of people, say, like, women, feel uncomfortable with, like, a certain minority in, like, a bathroom, then they should be allowed to exclude them from that bathroom. Is that correct?
She's not going to agree with
You're
the premise.
deflecting
She's not going to agree with the premise that trans people are a minority group. Fundamentally, TERFs rely on a false front that trans people are not a minority group, and that when they are bigoted towards trans people, it's not bigotry. It's not the same as being racist or homophobic. It's different. It's them fighting actually for a progressive cause is what they're trying to argue. They're desperately trying to attempt that trans rights as like a concept is like an infection on progressive like feminist ideology, and that they're the real woke ones. The fact that like they ally with Nazis and far right conservatives who are trying to take away like the rights to have, they're literally in favor of like repealing Roe v. Wade, etc. Also, J.K. Rowling recently came out in support of the Taliban, of all things. Not on my bingo card personally, but yeah, full on. She has come out in support of the Taliban. She outright tweeted, I believe it was, "At least the Taliban don't try to claim that men can be women and women can be men," or something like that.
Again, because we're talking about sex. We're not talking about race or whatever. We decided, or our grandparents decided that we were.
Oh, she liked a tweet saying that? My bad.
Based on race or national
Thank you for the
orientation
info,
or
Chair.
whatever, and so no, we can't just say like, oh, we don't want other people in the locker room with us. It's separated by sex.
Okay. In practice, it's really not separated by like your kind of strict definition of sex. When we acknowledge intersex people, when we acknowledge trans people using the bathroom without issue for literal decades, in practice, it's just not separated by sex in the way that you think it is. And as somebody that uses public accommodations, that's something you just have to acknowledge. Like,
yeah, but when you
that's
use
true. By the way, I went to me and Demon Mama went to Mount Shasta. We drove through Mount Shasta, very like little rural in town on top of a mountain in central Northern California area. Very like one of the most conservative areas in all of California. Anyone who knows anything about the area can attest to this. Literally one of the most conservative areas in all of California. We went into a diner. It was called like the Black Bear Diner or something like that. We went into a diner, and I had to use the bathroom. So I went to the bathroom, and there was one bathroom that you could use, and it specifically said gender-neutral bathroom. This was unironically months and months and months before Dead Space Remake came out, and the gender-neutral bathrooms thing became a meme that the conservatives lost their shit over, much like they are for the pronouns with Starfield right now. Yeah, they literally had a gender-neutral bathroom at this, like, boomer-ass, like, breakfast, like cafe stop type place, truck stop type place in Mount Shasta, one of the most conservative areas in all of California. It's very pretty, by the way. But yeah, I think it was like the Black Bear Diner. Love that place. Have you guys been to it before? Apparently it's like fairly well known. I like posted a video of us or a picture of us there on Twitter when we were there, and people seem to know it. So that's pretty cool that we just kind of like stumbled across a landmark location and ate there because it was like the best place we saw in our view. In Seattle? No, in Mount Shasta, California.
Accommodations.
Oh, it's a chain. I didn't know that.
You're comfortable with other women is my point. Like
I had literally no idea they were a chain. It was like it came off as like a single like place. It was very cozy. It was like really, really cozy, dude. It was a vibe.
And you say, oh, if you're not comfortable,
well, is it about
using those
comfort?
It was
spaces?
snowy too.
It's both. I would say both are important.
Okay. So if somebody
hey,
is uncomfortable with someone in a bathroom, then like what should they do about it?
It depends. If it's a women's bathroom and there's a man in there, then the man should leave. If they're just uncomfortable, like, okay, I'll use my own examples. In middle school, when I first started using girls' locker rooms, I wasn't always comfortable with other girls. So I would use the single stall or whatever. And then I just got over it and I was fine with it. So if you're not comfortable using it with somebody else of your own sex, then yeah, you can use a single stall.
Okay. So it seems that if somebody is uncomfortable, then they can just move to a different place, to a separate stall. Like you can just move to your own stall if you're uncomfortable with like a trans woman existing.
But they're men. It's a space for women. I am not uncomfortable using a locker room or even like showers or whatever with other women. I'm uncomfortable with a man being in that space.
But so like it's just coming down to like your comfort at that point, though. Like most women are actually comfortable with trans women using women's spaces. If you look at the survey data, most women literally are totally fine with it. So like you are in the minority.
I mean, I'll all look that up? What survey data?
I believe
are
it
you
was
talking
from
about?
either Reuters or Pew Research. I had seen this before. Most women comfortable.
Because I mean,
with trans
well,
people in
like
bathrooms.
when you Google,
Because like
well, when
right
you
now
Google
we're
that,
talking
go
about
ahead,
we're
go ahead.
talking about like your feelings of like being uncomfortable, but you're in the minority of this.
Well, when you put into Google, most women are comfortable with trans people. What do you think
Let's
is going to
see.
pop up?
We
If
have
you search
Okay, so if you search more women are comfortable with trans people on Google, you will get a list of different academic studies coming from .edu and .org websites, fact check sites, research sites like that are meant for publishing data, websites meant for publishing scientific articles, etc. Legit sites that are the kind of thing that your teacher would be fine with you sourcing in your MLA format citations at the end of like a writing assignment. But if you search women are uncomfortable with trans women in their spaces, you will get websites with .com and .tk and like whatever the domains, very openly conservative sites and turf-oriented sites that are very clear in their biases, such as in the fact that they have titles of their articles that say things like imposter men once again try to like it'll be very obviously a turf site, and it won't, like, you literally won't find academic articles or studies. Speaking of pro-trans, here's a song made by a trans person who made songs for Minecraft. Well, let me turn up the volume. It goes hard. Explain Lena Rain, transphobes.
if you search adult human female or
See, I
let women
have one
speak,
from the
you'll see
Hill.
countless women speaking about this.
Okay.
See, I have one from I have a poll from the Hill.
Yeah, and it's okay for us to go
All
over
of her
the poll data-
citations are
data, but I don't
videos.
want this debate to become too pedantic. So let's dive into
Yeah,
the
I mean,
data.
I'll just write down things and look them up.
Well,
as
we can dive
Yeah.
into the data, this kind of thing. We don't want to get too hung up on just a singular point, but go ahead with this one for now.
Yeah, so this is poll. Majority support law allowing transgender people to use bathrooms that align with their identity, and that's from the Hill. Like, your discomfort puts you in the minority, so at that point, I feel like you should just find your own space if you're going to be uncomfortable like that.
Yeah, but there's also thousands of countless women now who are speaking up about this. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar
They
with
are in the
Let Women
minority,
Speak. Do you think they're in the minority?
Well,
Vastly,
yeah,
yeah.
I
At
have the
least-
data right
Well,
here in front.
That's her response. Well, here I have a like data that says that women who are uncomfortable with trans women in their spaces are in the minority. And then she says, "But do you really think that, though?" Literally, like Pearl Davis tier response to
Of
data.
us, and it shows that they're in
Yeah,
the
but
minority.
you're quoting one article or one survey.
Do you want another data point? Because there's also data from Reuters
And
which found the
a lot
exact
of
same
women,
thing.
like, and what about all the women who speak up about this, who've been banned from Twitter and banned from social
This
media?
kind
and
is
banned
they're in the
from YouTube?
minority.
You don't,
That's what all the
you
data
don't
shows.
hear their voices.
Wait, are you
Well, yeah,
denying the
I thought-
reality that
I
all of
thought
the
you
data we
cared about
have?
minorities.
Are you sorry? Are you agreeing, or are you denying all of the data we have, which shows that yes, most people, including most women, are completely comfortable sharing a bathroom with a trans person?
Particularly
I don't
most
believe
women.
it, but I'll look it up. I'm
Okay.
writing these things
Trans
down. I'll
acceptance
look
is
them up,
higher
because
among
I'm
cis
not
women than
familiar-
cis
I'm not
men.
familiar with these things that you're quoting, so I can't
Okay,
say
I guess,
yes
like,
or no. I agree with that.
I'm also interested in your thoughts on like transgender men, because
Like, remember, trans acceptance is higher among cis women than cis men. Why would that be the case if cis women were uniquely in danger because of trans women? That would make no sense. If there was like this overarching societal problem going on right now, where women were feeling like they were at threat by trans women, like, why would cis women be the most supportive demographic of cis people? Why would it be cis women and not cis men? If cis men would see it as like an opportunity to be able to predate on women too. It literally makes no sense. Like, you don't really even need data to argue against these points. It actually does just take a little bit of critical thinking, and you'll be like, wait a second, Yeah, wait, hold on. That doesn't really work out, like, with her logic. If all men are, like, ticking time bombs of rape, then it doesn't really make sense that men wouldn't be supportive of this supposed, like, movement that's making it easier for men to assault women, right? Like, yeah, literally, like, with their own logic, you can destroy their arguments without even having to use data.
Because, you know, if you're so if you're
Gotta
like
love
so
that mining
concerned
fatigue.
of like big hulking men entering, you know, women's bathrooms or women's spaces, like, are you aware of transgender men?
I'm aware of women who do extreme body modification. Yes.
Okay, so like, do you think that a trans man should be in the women's bathroom?
So,
I
trans
would say
women
yes.
are
Yeah, 'cause
have you
there's
seen
still
predatory
female.
men? Have you seen like
I have
what
seen
what
some-
Buck
yeah,
trans
Angel looks
men
like? Have
are
you
women
seen,
who've
like,
got
I know
nature
Buck
body
Angel, and
modification, I see.
My thing with that is, I'm like, well,
'Cause, like,
then
he's
it's
a
on
hulking
them
dude.
to find the,
you want hulking
I would
dudes in the women's bathroom?
Gotta give
I would
Rachel a
say
chance
it's-
to respond to him.
Would
Go
you
ahead.
feel
I would
safe in
say
the
it's
women's
on them
bathroom with Buck Angel?
Okay, I'm not saying it's up to me to give away men's spaces. Like, I'm not going to say, oh, just go use the men's spaces, because that's not my right to say. I would say if you've changed your body so much that you cause women to be frightened or women to be scared or whatever, then that's on you to find your own accommodations. You can use the single stall, and if men are cool with you coming into their space, then you can go use the men's room, because
So
they're not a
wait.
threat to men.
Are you? Wait, so you previously said you were okay with trans men using the women's bathroom. Now you're saying you're not okay with trans men using the women's bathroom?
I mean, it just depends on what they look like, but I do acknowledge that, yeah, they do, like, they can, yeah, they have beards, they don't look like women. So yeah, if they're causing like a startling reaction or something,
So now
then
we're
it's
getting
just
to
kind of
just
on them
outright
to
virulent
deal with it
hatred.
and find the
How
right
do
place.
you expect to enforce this at kind of like any kind of policy level where the policy for trans men is now, if I think you look like too much of a man, you should use the men's, or you should use some other space. But
Or
if
too much of a
you-
woman?
if you look still not scary to me, then they're fine. Like, how do you expect to enforce that? That's a crazy policy to like draw
It's
the
just-
line
I mean, I
at some
guess-
kind of arbitrary notion of like how manly they look.
I mean, I guess I would come back to like just black and white. It should be based on sex, and I do
Well, hold up.
understand
If you're basing
that. Yeah,
it off
like
of sex, that would say that trans men should use the women's bathroom. So you're flip flopping again.
yeah. So no, I know, and so I would have to.
You don't have a
Agree,
consistent
man.
Funny as
policy
fuck.
on trans men.
She's
I-
You
panicking.
just haven't
I-
thought
no,
about
I
this
don't-
before.
Look, I don't have a consistent thought on trans men, because I do say,
Well,
like,
isn't
I
it
do
a little
see
bit
that.
irresponsible?
Oh,
for you to
she
be
accidentally
advocating
said
for
trans
things at
men.
the policy level,
She's
at the government
flustered.
level,
Can I
when you
finish
haven't
a
even
thought?
thought about trans men.
The moderator's
Yeah,
about to step
you-
in.
you
Yep, there you
can-
go.
you can finish.
Cuck
Go ahead.
moderator.
Yeah.
I don't mean it, though. I don't think the moderator's cucked. To be completely honest with you guys, I can't really give the moderator that much. The mod's username used to be Big Papa Fascist. Remember him? Oh, that's Big Papa Fascist? Oh, never mind. Yeah, okay. Apparently, yeah, no. Big Papa Fascist is a fascist.
Because I want to protect women's spaces. Trans men, which are just women, they're really not a threat to anybody. They aren't a threat.
Hold up.
So
Why aren't
yeah,
they a threat?
because they're still women. They
Hold
still
up. They
have
might
women
see a woman
like
naked.
female.
That's
Once
a
again,
threat.
just letting the game out. Men are predators, and trans men are just women, and we don't consider women a threat because they're, like, literally, like, this is the same type of thought that made it so that, and I still think this might still be the case today, that women can't commit rape in the UK. TERF influence was pretty heavy on a lot of the law making in the UK, and so for at least a very long time, and up until recently at least, it might still be the case, correct me if I'm wrong, women, cis women, legally could not commit rape, particularly against a man, in the UK. Because legally, to commit rape, you had to be the one committing penile penetration against the victim, and women, like cis women, can't do penile penetration. And I believe it has to be into a vagina as well, which means specifically in the law, only women could be the victims of rape as well. So I believe even if a man raped another man, it wouldn't be a rape charge; it would be a sexual battery charge. So it would still be illegal. It's still charged. It's just not charged as rape. In the UK for a very long time, and it still might be the case. The only time it would be charged as rape is like classic man puts his penis into a woman's vagina when he's not welcome. Like that is the type of lawmaking that motivates that TERF's cause.
Under your
They're
worldview,
still women, though. They're still women.
how
They're
can
still
you
women,
tell?
and You can tell somebody by their body frame. I mean, like, I know Buck Angel, when you see her pictures, like at first glance, yeah, it looks like a man, but when you see the full body
so you're
shot,
totally
it's still
comfortable with Buck Angel and people that look like him walking into the women's bathroom, but you're uncomfortable with someone like Blair White walking into the women's bathroom? Like, you're delusional if you truly believe
Blair
that.
White looks like a man. If you see
If
Blair
you
White's
feel
full
more
body,
comfortable,
broad
if you feel more
shoulders,
comfortable with,
narrow hips, it still looks like a man.
if you feel more comfortable with Buck White in the women's bathroom than
Buck-
Buck Angel than Blair White,
It's okay.
then you are crazy. One of those
They're
is
the
a
same.
hulking man, and
Who
the other's a
cares?
bimbo.
But they're both
One is a
retarded.
hulking man. Yes, I will agree with that. Yeah, but no, look, I can admit that, yeah, it does cause some.
She just called Blair White a hulking man. So, like, you have to understand, there's nothing but, like, hatred that drives these people's ideology. Like, she can't make an argument. She can't bring any actual statistics or data into the conversation. She just really, really, really hates the minority group that you're allowed to hate more so than any other right now. And so she's just taking full advantage of that. Some people just want to be bigots. And right now, the hip group to be a bigot towards is trans people.
Complications and confusions. You can't always tell who's who, but I think it's worth trying to enforce it, at least to protect it on the basis of sex, these spaces for women.
Okay, so like
I think it's
we
I
still
think
just
it's better.
haven't gotten any
Okay,
kind of
I
like
think
clear policy on trans men, and you're doing things at the legal level. Like I just have to go back to, this seems so completely irresponsible and ill thought out when you're flip-flopping and cracking at even just the slightest pushback about trans men existing, and yet you're doing things at like a political action committee level. Like that's so crazy how little you've thought about this issue.
I mean, I do think more about the men coming into women's spaces.
It's crazy
I don't
how much
see
she
trans
sounds like
men as
Pearl
a threat
Davis.
to anybody. I don't think they're a threat to,
Well, I can tell you
men.
that
I don't think they're a threat to
in
women.
general, women feel a lot more afraid of trans men being forced to use the bathroom with them than trans women being allowed to use the bathroom with them. Like this is what the data shows. Women believe.
And I would say that's on us to figure out. Like that's, like I said, the male on male violence.
That's
for
on
men
us to
out.
figure
We
out.
Women will have to.
Yeah, just
figure
hand
that
wave it
issue out
because you can't have
ourselves.
that conversation. You can't
yeah, I
justify
I
it
just like that
abuse.
view of saying just like, oh, you know what, that violence is just not my
Fuck me.
not my problem to
Misplaced
worry
blocks
about.
are
Like,
fatal here.
people are actively being victimized by
Have
the
to go
kinds
get
of
more milk.
policies you're suggesting. I cited data which showed that trans people
And I would.
are multiple times more likely to be raped with the policies that you're proposing, and you're just like, oh, not my problem, don't care. Like that's awful. Like you are literally just telling rape victims that you don't care.
I care about rape victims. I care
Unless they're
that
trans.
federally. I care that federally funded domestic violence shelters have to admit men or lose their funding. I care about women in prison who have, for many of them,
Rachel,
have been
do you
victims
care
of
about
sexual.
trans?
She literally just argued it is bad that, like, sexual assault shelters have to accept men. Because remember, TERFs do not believe men can be victims of sexual assault or rape. So, like, it's the same. I literally described that mindset in the form of policy and the policy that it motivates, and how it was the case in the UK, where they literally, in the UK, legally, cis women couldn't commit rape, even against other women. So it's really just an evil and demonic worldview these people have. It's just hatred. It's just hatred. They're trying to make hatred sound woke. Because they still want to be like girl boss feminists, but they're also bigots.
Assault. Can
Do you
I
care about
finish a
trans victims
thought,
of rape?
please?
Yeah, go for it.
I care about. Well, I don't think trans is real. So I care that women in prison, many of whom have been victims of sexual and domestic violence, now have to share cells with men and spaces with men. I care about that. And yes, I have sympathy for all victims. I have empathy for all victims. But my solution is not to erase women's boundaries.
All right, I'm going to give you... So, do you guys know why I'm so good at predicting what a conservative is going to say? It's because I've heard a lot of their, like, retarded worldview repeated over and over again in a lot of different forms. And it's very, like, it's gotten to the point where I can literally imagine a debate with a conservative in my head right now and tell me that this isn't a plausible, like, interaction for how it would go if I talked to her. Here's what I would argue right now if I could beam myself into Naomi's place right now in the debate. I would ask, okay, it's very clear that we're getting hung up on a very fundamental disagreement, and that's whether or not people who identify as a gender different from the one they were assigned at birth, trans people, are valid as the identity they identify with. So let's talk about that. Why do you not believe that a trans woman is a woman? What is a woman to you, and what is a man to you? Take as much time as you need. Let her explain whatever batshit reasoning she has, and then say, well, that's all very nice, but how do you feel about the fact that the entire consensus of academia disagrees with that? For example, sex and gender not being the same thing is agreed upon by the American Psychological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American there's like a bunch of them. I'd have to have the list brought up so I could list them all perfectly, but this is just off the top of my head. Obviously the United Nations and the England Health Service, the National England Health Service, the NHS is what the acronym. All these back up the fact that gender and sex aren't the same thing. There's more than two genders, that sex is not just binary. So, like, we could literally go through all the data, and then at that point it's like, so what is your basis for believing that trans people are not valid? Is it just like you feel like they're not real women? You feel like they're not real men? Because you keep on saying this, and it seems like that's the fundamental disagreement we have here. And if it's just based on how you feel, then I really just don't see you as any different than the racist white women who argued against desegregating bathrooms back during the 1960s because they felt that they were in danger by being in the same spaces as black women. That was, of course, the originator of many of these arguments, by the way. Wealthy, affluent, white women during the civil rights movement who argued against desegregation because they felt the presence of black women in like women's bathrooms and women's locker rooms was a threat to them. Because, of course, a very common racist talking point about black women specifically is that they are, like, uniquely aggressive, angry, or violent.
I care about men who are victims of assault. I do. But again, the solution is to not just let them into women's spaces. They can't take refuge in women's spaces.
But, like, there's no increase in assaults or privacy violations when we do. Like, it's literally not a problem based off of any evidence we have.
Okay, well, again, I don't want to go in circles with this, but, like, I say just being in the space for women, even if assault doesn't happen, is a privacy violation.
It's all fifis.
We're kind of going in circles.
This is once again like the flip-floppy problem, where it's like, you care about, like, the material harm until it's pointed out that there is no material harm, and then you immediately jump back to your feelings. Like, at the end of the day, things are just going to fall back to your feelings, and falling back on feelings has a heinous history of exclusion in bathrooms, from gay people being excluded of bathrooms to the white-only bathrooms we had in the civil rights era. The history of this kind of argument of, well, my feelings of not being comfortable in a bathroom with this person that I don't like, or this minority, it's just used to harm people. And it's based off of no data, no, like, true differences in assaults or privacy violations. It just hurts minorities. Like, that's the entire point.
Well, I would say that gender identity is just based on feelings, and yet there's laws protecting it.
I would love to talk about gender identity, because we can actually locate it in the brain.
Let Rachel finish the point, and then you can move in.
So gender identity is a protected characteristic, and I would say that that's just based on your feelings, your own internal sense of self, and it's just an ideological belief.
Okay, so she understands. So she's one of the anti-gender TERFs. There's two different types of TERFs. There are the ones that are much less ideologically groomed, like they don't know the talking points as well. And these are the ones that just simply argue sex and gender are the same thing. Like, a woman is a female, and a female is a woman. A male is a man, and a man is a male, and that's just all it is. But then you get your more, like, gender abolitionist, more meta TERFs who say, oh yeah, I don't believe in gender. I agree with you that gender is just a social construct. I don't believe in it. I believe that sex is what matters. At that point, they're relying on you not knowing the scientific consensus on sex, because sex is nowhere near as rigid and straightforward as they're trying to convince you it is either. And there is plenty of data to prove this, an overwhelming abundance of data. And when I say overwhelming, I like to use overwhelming a lot because that is the feeling I have whenever I look into this data is, wow, this is literally overwhelming. Because, like, it's hard to read through it all, and I feel overwhelmed. I'm being very literal about that. Yeah, it is actually insane how much research has been done on this and how long form said research has been. Like, it's long form. And there's just no ambiguity around it anymore. Also, this is like the most layout for an ocean temple. I literally had to carve through the wall to get into the rest of the temple. I think this one glitched out in its generation. That's fine.
Is real. It's much more observable, and even though it's like, yeah, there's DSD and intersex, it's much more observable than gender identity.
So if I'm understanding
but gender identity as a protected characteristic is trumping sex. It's trumping women's rights to fair sports, women's rights to safe prisons and locker rooms, all of women's sex-based rights.
Keep saying safe.
Okay, I think we're just going in circles on like your feelings. So
I'd
love
danger.
to talk about gender identity and how you say that something is real because it's observable. Is that correct?
Sure, I'll say that.
Awesome. Yeah, gender identity
So is air not real?
Observable in the brain. We have done MRI scans.
Like, she literally just... Yeah, okay, wait, hold on. Is air not real? Then I can't observe air right now. It's fucking clear. That's a very stupid argument that something is real because it is observable. There's tons of shit we literally can't observe that we know is real, particularly in the realm of space. There's a lot of shit in space that we know is real, but we literally can't observe it. We observe other shit that is a clue that it's real. That's literally most of researching space.
Studies on the brains of transgender people, and we see time and time again that the brains of transgender people are actually shifted to be more like the brains of the gender they identify with. There are some subtle differences between men's and women's brains on average, and this is true about trans people too. However, for trans people, it's shifted in the direction of their gender identity, not of the sex they were assigned at birth. So yeah, gender identity is real. We can measure it in the brain.
The brain scans that I'm familiar with show how the brain changes when you're taking testosterone or estrogen or synthetic hormones.
So that's part of it.
That, to me,
synthetic hormones.
To me, that doesn't prove that gender identity.
That's part of it.
Okay.
We also have studies on trans people before they medically transition, and there are still regions of their brains that are shifted
they're
towards
chemicals.
gender identity. This is
How they're
observable
produced
even
makes
before
no
medical
difference.
transition.
But then how, okay, so my question on that is like, what is gender identity in the brain? Like, do they have more feminine characteristics or more masculine characteristics? Okay, that doesn't make you male or female. And I would say your brain is still...
No, as in like when you do a brain scan of a trans woman and a brain scan of a cis woman, and then you do a brain scan of a cis man, the trans woman's brain is like phenomenally closer to the cis woman's brain than the cis man's brain. Obviously, this isn't always the case, but most of the time it's the case. That tends to be the source of the gender dysphoria, is that like internally in your brain you are like it's arguable that there is a phenomena of like female brain that trans women have and like male brain that cis men have. So much so to the point that like those are literally phrases in the trans community, like male brain, femme brain, or whatever. Like you can get your, like I've got trans friends that I'll want them to do something with me, so I'll be like, oh, I got an idea. Hey man, it would be pretty male brained of you if you stayed up all night watching Better Call Saul with me. And they'd be like, I do want to be male brained, and it works every time. That's how you get your trans friends to do stuff. You just tell them it would be blank-brained of them to do that thing, and they'll do it. It's very easy.
Hang on. Let Rachel make the point, Naomi. Hang on. Just
and like
your brain. From whether or not gender identity
I know you
is
can
real.
push back in just a second, but let her finish her point.
Okay.
And the brain, every cell of your brain is still has like male or female sex chromosomes in it. So even if you have more effeminate
male or female, once again, they will acknowledge the existence of intersex people when you bring them up as an argument, but in their like explanation for why they believe a thing, they refuse to acknowledge the existence of intersex people, despite the fact that their mere existence negates the entire argument. They try to make you forget that they conceded that argument already. Hang out with me and I'll affirm your gender. True.
And that shows up in your brain in whatever region. That doesn't make you female or male. Like that's not what determines
that's
your
not what
sex.
I'm talking about. That's
You're talking about gender. But
what I'm talking about is whether. Hold up. What I'm trying to talk about is whether or not gender identity is real. You said that we can't base things off of gender identity because it's not real. I'm not saying that having a gender identity like gives you
cut
a
out for a
pussy or
second.
whatever.
I'm so
What I'm
sorry.
saying is that gender identity is real and we can observe it in the brain.
I'm sorry, Naomi. Your camera actually crashed out again.
Oh, it seems like to me you're trying to dodge the point as to whether or not gender identity is real.
Thank you,
So
Fortnite.
now that I've explained, transgender identity and how we can actually view it in the brain and like MRI scans, do you acknowledge that gender identity is real?
Well, what you explained doesn't say that gender identity is real. It shows that maybe certain personality traits might show up in the brain, but that doesn't mean that gender identity is real or that it should
This
be a
is based
protected
on gender
characteristic.
identity, as in we observe these
my
traits
game crash.
in people that have a certain gender identity. So be it a cis woman or a trans woman, or like a cis man or like a trans man, that these profiles of brain structures are based off of the gender identity. I mean, this is how we recognize conditions in the brain, say like autism or ADHD or depression. Like this
I'm gonna
is kind of
restart
just the psychiatric standard of recognizing, like for example,
crashed
a
as
mental
soon as
health
I
condition
clicked.
in the brain. So like,
But
No
what
respawn.
but what's showing up in the brain? Like all I'm hearing is these characteristics of being effeminate or masculine or interests or whatever. Like can you give me an example of what's showing up?
yeah, it's like different distributions of certain regions of the brain, like particularly dealing with like the hypothalamus, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Trans women notably have so cis men notably, when you do a brain scan of a cis man, the part of our brains that functions around rational thinking and consideration and taking a second thought for things is literally smaller than that of cis women and trans women. It's literally unironically one of the best theories for why men are more reckless than women is that women literally have a part of their brain that is centered around, wait, should I do this thing? For them is larger than for cis men. This is also true of many trans women. So like that's just one example I know of. Like cis trans women live about as long as cis women. And a large part of that is attributed to the fact that trans women are also as risk and danger averse as cis women, as opposed to men who more often than cis women will be like insane, like thrill junkies who will like endanger their lives for fun and think nothing of it. Like you've seen the memes, like this is why, and people wonder why women live longer than men. You know, like those memes? Yeah. Okay, there we go. Well, let me resize this. Yeah.
Like there are certain like hypothalamus profiles which we generally observe in women, and trans women's brains tend to exhibit those as well.
Okay, and you're saying that that's before estrogen too?
Yes.
Like before, but I mean, is that like a personality thing? Like, oh, this person likes more traditionally feminine things, and that's
it's a
the
brain
hypothalamus
scan.
controls a lot of brain function. Like the brain's quite intricately
You
complicated.
can't like will your
essentially what I'm
hypothalamus.
saying is that
You can't will your hypothalamus. I promise you cannot literally will your hypothalamus into becoming bigger. Okay, that's not a thing. You can't like literally. Did I get it off before the... Oh, I got it off before the mining fatigue. Let's go. You can't literally will your hypothalamus into being bigger so you pass better as being trans. That's not a thing. They were born that way, and that's like part of them being trans is that their brain, at least for them specifically, if that's the case for them, and it is in many cases, is that their brain is like structurally closer to that of a cis woman. And, like, you can be mad about that fact as much as you want. I get it. It's inconvenient for TERFs that, like, you can literally scan a trans woman's brain and see the difference between her and a cis man and the similarity between her and a cis woman. It's inconvenient, and it sucks for TERFs. I get it. It's really, really inconvenient. But, like, reality doesn't conform to convenience for your ideology. I'm sorry. If you genuinely, sincerely believe this stuff, I'm sorry. You got unlucky. You ended up with the wrong ideology. You got with the wrong people, and if you care about truth, you're going to have to reconcile that somehow. It sucks. It's hard to do. I had to do it once. I was once conservative. It's tough. But when you let facts and not feelings guide your politics, you'll find that you're much more free. You'll find that when your politics are motivated by feelings, you have to contort and bend the truth and bend stories to actually have relation to the point you're trying to make. when you actually care about the truth and you are trying to argue for the truth, you don't have to do so much hard work. You just have to know what happened and know what the experts are saying, and that's it. Like, you don't have to do all that extra hard work of having to manufacture a lie to sucker people into believing. You just say what's the case. I find it a lot easier, personally. I don't know. Maybe these conservative grifter types have more fun lying, though. Maybe it's easier for them than telling the truth. It's definitely more profitable.
That the profile of brain matter distributions of trans people looks like the brains of the gender they identify with. Like, this shows that there is a physical reality to gender identity located in the brain.
Okay, I just don't believe.
Not always, though. This is a sort of nearing. I get why Naomi is doing it, because it's easier to argue on this basis and not get into the advanced with someone who's actively transphobic. But I think it is important to clarify that in most cases that is what's happening, because at the end of the day, if we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of it, being trans is literally as simple as just identifying as a gender different from the one you were assigned at birth. It doesn't go any further than that. It requires nothing more than that in all technicality. But I do think there is, in some cases, merit to it distinguishing whether or not someone is genuinely identifying as trans. In the case of Chris Chan, for example, I think it's worth the fact that they've admitted to not being genuinely, sincerely identifying as a woman is relevant to discussions when people are using Chris Chan as an argument against trans rights. Just, yeah, it's one of those things.
Believe that, but again, I'll look up the studies. All I know is that the studies that I'm familiar with show that the brain changes with hormones.
It does change with hormones. It's also shifted even before hormones.
And yeah, and what you're saying is it just seems like personality traits are showing up in the brain.
That's not.
We're talking about personality distributions, which go beyond just personality traits.
You can't see personality traits.
Yeah, but it's still okay. What? For example, I don't know how that should be protected.
You can see an inflamed area of the brain that is known for causing violence and anger outbursts, and deduce from that the person might have a tendency to violent outbursts. But usually that's diagnosing someone with a mental condition, not literally detecting personality traits through brain scans. It's not, as far as I know, that's not a thing. I was under the impression that the human brain is still a vastly misunderstood biological computer that to this day is stumping and impressing scientists and biologists alike. I was under the impression, by the way, I'm not joking here, this is actually 100% true, that we are still vastly unfamiliar with the way the brain actually works. We don't even know why dreams happen.
As a characteristic that your brain
the same
is
way
slightly
that
more
other
feminine
mental health
or...
conditions are protected in the law. So, for example, people are born with brains that have certain profiles, certain mental health conditions, and that should be protected in the law.
She's also conceded that trans women have female personalities.
They have a unique brain profile, and they should be protected from discrimination in the law, right?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. And the same should be true for people that have gender dysphoria.
Sure. I don't think anybody should be discriminated from using a public place based on their mental illness. I've never said that or never advocated for that or mental
now it's the mental illness talking point.
You're advocating
but that doesn't make them male or
what you're advocating for is either they choose to self-discriminate or they choose to enter a space where they're much more likely to be raped. That's what you're advocating for.
I just don't believe, I mean, you can send me another survey or statistic or whatever, but I just don't feel like going into a man's space puts you at danger. I just don't believe it.
You want me to cite?
I don't believe.
Why would it put you at danger?
I just don't believe it.
For you. There was also the Department
why would
of
it be
Justice
dangerous for men to be in your space then?
Being trans is associated with a 10 times higher rate of sexual assault if you're forced into a prison of the sex you were assigned at birth. So trans.
Yeah, you're far more likely to be the victim of sexual assault. Guys, I don't know if you know this, but when the horny degens who want to do rape in prison find out a trans woman has been brought into the block, it is immediately a countdown to when the sexual assault happens. And the more that said trans woman passes, the more likely. You've basically just put a woman into a men's prison. They were already raping men because they were so desperate for some hole. You've just put a, like, in some cases, like, someone you would look at and be like, that's a woman, into like, the, yeah, like, you know what's going to happen. It's very obvious, and the data bears out that very believable reality, because of course it does. Because of course that's what happens, because, obviously. Because it's prison, and trans women are women.
Women in men's prisons are 10 times more likely to be raped.
I can believe the prison thing. I can believe that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I just don't feel like the solution to that is to just let them into women's spaces.
Well, I think that the prison issue is a bit more complicated, and I would definitely be supportive of handling things more on like a case-by-case basis. You know, ultimately, like if someone's a violent sexual offender, I think that we should take extra precautions to, like, you know, house them in a space where they're not going to cause harm.
Just to get clarification on this point, as it's brought up, do you guys both consider women's prison specifically to be a woman's space?
Yeah, I would say that women's prisons is a women's space.
I mean, that would be necessarily included in the debate, though. I think it's fair game to talk about.
Yeah, like it's definitely bigger than locker rooms and bathrooms are important. But yeah, this applies to prisons, women's domestic violence shelters, sports, obviously is in the news, but any place that's for women. And yeah, I mean, like, women's prisons still should just be based on sex, like, because violent women aren't sent to men's prisons, you know. So
well,
gentle,
no, but violent women are
non-violent
handled
men
differently. I think that's in certain circumstances you do have to handle things kind of on a case-by-case basis. Also recognizing that intersex women might pose either potential threats or potential extra opportunity for being victimized based off of their intersex status. I think it's very important to kind of handle some of these things on a case-by-case basis because it can be messy.
Sure. And I mean, like, even within prison, there's different levels of security, there's different kinds of housing. Like, it's far from perfect. We can probably all agree on that, but there's still measures in place.
Well, if we have different levels of security and housing, couldn't we take like a higher security level with like a trans woman so that she's not raped at 10 times the higher rate in a men's prison?
She can be put in a lower security place.
You want her in a lower security place where she's more likely to be raped?
Look, again, it's not women's problem to deal with. Like, don't put him in a
this
men's
is exactly
prison.
what I'm saying. You don't care about
Matt
rape
had to
victims
correct
when they're
yourself
trans.
again.
I don't care about
It'll
putting
never not
men
be
in
funny when
women's
she accidentally
prisons or
doesn't
women's
misgender a trans
spaces.
person.
You're literally not
I
even trying
have-
to deny that you don't care about trans women being raped. Like, that's heinous.
Of course, I care about anybody. Like, I don't want anybody to be sexually assaulted or harmed. I've never advocated for that. But again,
Right,
my
but you like, just don't
argument is that
care if a trans person is raped.
I'm saying that the solution is not to put men who might be more likely to be victimized. They don't belong in women's spaces. I'm sure that men who might be of a smaller statute or gay
Insane
men
how much
or
she's moved the
men with
goalpost.
disability.
It's crazy how much she's conceded already and like how much the goalpost has moved. The argument she's trying to defend at this point, like the general like set of arguments she's trying to defend at this point is unrecognizable from her original set of arguments because she literally she couldn't withstand. It all fell apart for her. Funniest shit I've ever seen. Oh, fuck, I need to go to the nether and drought the sponges. Keep getting distracted.
They might be more likely to be assaulted in prison, but they don't go into the women's prison for refuge. They stay in the men's prison.
Well, right, because there are systems in place that can help them within the men's prison, but that's just not
And
the
I
case
would
for
say-
trans women.
Well, I would say that you would need to advocate for that for men who call themselves trans or men with gender dysphoria.
Well, I literally told you I do advocate for these things to be handled on a case-by-case basis because it is nuanced and complicated. And ultimately, I want everyone to be safe. I'm advocating for policies which are going to maximize the safety of everyone. Cis women, trans women, all women, like literally. I'm trying to come up with nuanced policies that are going to best preserve the rights to privacy and safety of everyone. Meanwhile, you're over here just shrugging if a trans woman gets raped and been like, well, not really my problem.
I mean, I don't mean to sound callous about it, but again, the solution is not to put that person in a women's prison or in a women's space. It's just not the solution.
It works in women's prisons. Like, we have different levels of security clearance that we handle on a case-by-case basis. Prevent trans women from being raped against disproportionate rape.
What about women who are now being impregnated by men in prison now?
Oh, you mean by like male security guards? Because that's been a problem for a
No,
long
by
time.
men who identify as women and being allowed to go into women's prisons because
Is it
of
consensual?
I've seen
this. And yeah, I mean,
I've seen that this is an
Go ahead.
exceptionally rare thing that happens, and I think we should be taking steps to like deal with it. But ultimately,
what
like
steps
in a
would you?
Well, for starters, it's the fact that, like, tons of illegal shit happens in prison. The guards are paid off all the fucking time. Tons of COs are like literally in on what's going on. Most contraband in prisons is getting in because of corrupt COs that are bringing it in, and they're getting paid by like the prisoners or like the friends of the prisoners to do that shit. And it can be simple stuff like sneaking in cell phones. That's the most common thing, sneaking in cell phones. When, like, at night in any jail or prison, especially in jails, there are people smoking crack or doing heroin in some of the cells. The, like, more, like, successful, like, popular people in the prison, so to say, like the more powerful people who have access to, like, the drugs and they're smoking it up. They're smoking it up at night. You know, between calls, they like the police, like the CEOs, like they or COs, they announce when like a roll call is about to happen. They give roughly plenty of time to hide contraband. Functionally in prison, like if you know anything about it, you know you pretty much have to become a criminal to survive in prison. Just down to things as simple as not snitching on crimes you see. That is a crime, but you will be killed if you do not break the law in that respect. So it's just, yeah, there's so much wrong with the prison system as a whole that overall criminal justice reform is like vital. And the argument that like she's going to try to make is going to completely fall apart when Nominal Naomi says, oh no, I don't think it needs to be like solutions that just address this problem. I think the criminal justice system is so fundamentally broken, it needs to be entirely overhauled. I hope that's what she argues and just like completely throws this lady for a curveball.
You suggest to deal with that?
Yeah.
What
So we
steps
can
would you
like
suggest to
identify
deal with that?
potential like risky inmates and make sure that there's a housing situation such that we're going to, you know, minimize risks of pregnancy and assault, and handle this on like a case-by-case basis. But I mean, it's ultimately a fact about the world that in all of these systems we set up with women's prisons, like women getting impregnated, particularly by male guards, which is the most likely threat of them being impregnated in a women's prison is male guards, not trans people. Like, that's what we really need to be focusing on if we're really trying to reduce this risk.
And and that could be a separate conversation because I wouldn't have a problem
that, like,
with
it's not something you've even thought about before. When
let
it's
me
like
finish
the
a
more
thought.
likely issue.
I have thought about it. Let me finish a thought.
Finish.
I wouldn't be against the idea of only.
What happens when trans women can get pregnant? Because, like, that's gonna happen in our lifetimes. I don't think you guys realize that, but that, like, we're actually really close to that. Like I don't, like, you guys might scoff at me saying that right now, but I'm not joking. We're actually, like, pretty close to that technologically. We can, like, grow uteruses with stem cell tissue, or stem cells, and then, like, incubate a fetus outside of the body and shit like that. We've done it with, like, goats and sheep. So we are legitimately, like, less than a lifetime, much less than a lifetime away from implanting artificial wombs or even artificially grown biological wombs into trans women that are fully capable of ovulation, of, producing and full on, we're, like, not far from that. We could probably watch some content about it if you guys want. There's really interesting science content on YouTube that just focuses on, like, here is where we're at in terms of technological advancement in regards to giving trans dudes fully functioning cocks. You know, just, like, that kind of scientific, like, advancement shit.
Female guards. I mean, that's a different conversation. I'm sure there's a lot to think about with that and consider. But that's a conversation I'd be willing to have. But again, the solution is not to put more men in those spaces. Like, male security guards raping female inmates is a problem. The solution is not to put more men in that space.
I guess, like, I guess my question to you is, like, what's worse? Like, say if there's, like, a consensual sexual relationship in prison between, like, a trans woman and a cis woman, or, like, that trans woman going to a male prison and being raped. Like, which one's worse?
Well, first of all, there is no
one's
legal
more statistically likely
consensual sex in prison. Because of the Prison Rape Elimination Act, there is no legal.
Okay. That's not how consent works. Did you just say that your definition of consent is dependent on the law? Did she just say that's not consensual and then explain consent as if the law is what determines what is and isn't consent? That's not how it works. Our laws are meant to be based off of our moral prescriptions. It is not immoral to like it isn't. Kids can't consent because the law says kids can't consent. The law says kids can't consent because kids can't consent. For example, like that's not how it works. That's not how consent legally works. Consent is a concept based on whether or not the other party is capable of giving consent. That is to say, are their faculties fully there enough that they can give consent? I don't think she's smart enough to argue that in a setting like prison, you could say that one isn't like in a position where they could rationally determine that they do want to have sex with an individual, like because they are currently in that situation that makes them incapable of consenting, maybe, but that's a pretty weird philosophical argument to even try to make. But I don't even think she's smart enough to make it, and I don't think that's where she's even going, because I just don't think she's put enough thought into this. I think she's just floundering for an argument at this point. It's very fun to watch, I must say. Watching conservatives flounder will never not be fun.
Legally consensual sex. There's just not. So you can't say that there is any consensual sex.
I mean, people do
prison.
have consensual sex in prison.
I'm sure that they do,
like
and I'm
bros
sure
jacking
men
each
have...
other off, or like women, doing their womenly things.
I'm sure that it happens. I'm not denying that, but legally, it's rape no matter what. So
plenty of guys are gay for the stay.
I mean, like, two people having consensual sex in prison is
I
obviously
love that
not
phrase,
as bad
by
as
the
somebody
way.
being raped.
Gay for the stay.
Okay.
Yes, I can
So
agree
jailer
with you
prison.
there.
Your fear-mongering about the first case as a means of justifying a system which is going to lead to a lot more of trans people being raped in men's prisons.
But what about more women being raped in women's prisons by letting men who call themselves women being put in there?
Yes,
women are being raped
now. If we
now.
properly handle this on a case-by-case basis, there is not going to be any increased risk of rape in women's prisons. All data we have shows that when this is handled properly, there is no increase in rapes and assaults that happen in women's prisons.
But again, so you said the Department of Justice
Floundering.
But
Desperate
we're hearing
for a
reports
reason to hate
of women
minorities.
being raped in prison now. So how big
That's
does the number need to
Anecdotes
get?
happen all the time. I'm asking you for data. Like, do you have actual data, statistics, which show that trans women are a disproportionate threat to women in women's prisons?
I would say that they're men. And
always
men
hammer in your point. This is just me nitpicking, but always hammer in your point. I would have added, because I have data that says the opposite. Always, reiterate, not only is it that your opponent isn't bringing data to the table, but you are. Facts agree with you and disagree with her, and she is unable to bring up a single compelling argument. It's very important to hammer that home.
Prisons is a disproportionate
Okay, so you
threat.
don't have data. Like, you're just making up a narrative.
Because men commit more sexual assaults. So yes.
And the data does not show this
as
the case for trans
don't
women.
commit more sexual assaults. So your logic
But
is
they're
flawed.
men. They're men. And so putting
But they
men
don't
in
It's
have the
literally
sexual
deranged.
assault
It's
profile of
incoherent.
they
It's
have
incoherent.
the male but they retain the male patterns and the male
No, they don't.
what's
You're
the word?
witnessing
Propensity
political
for
incoherence.
violence that they always had.
They literally don't.
This is where bigotry
Like,
will take
all
your
data
brain.
we have shows that that's not the case. Trans women do not.
This is your brain on
commit assaults
bigotry.
or privacy violations at an increased rate.
Well, I mean, I'm just wondering how many women is it gonna take for you to care, by these men being transferred
any data
into
that showed that this was
All
a
right,
real
we're getting a
problem,
pivot.
I would take the problem seriously and take steps
But
to
how many-
best handle the safety of everyone.
Okay, there's multiple women in New Jersey, for example, who have become pregnant by a man in prison.
Twos.
Okay,
There are
these are just
multiple cases. Again, but there's multiple. I mean, I
Ones
can show
of
you
them.
the articles and stuff.
I don't
and
care
I'm
about
just wondering-
anecdotes. I care about data. I care about statistics.
But it's it's a reported number. Like this.
No, it's not.
Like
it's a case. That's an anecdote. I can find you cases.
My question is.
Hold on.
My question
I can
is,
find you an
how
anecdote.
many
I can find you a
women
case.
Will it make you care? Like, how many women is it going to take for you to care? Like, I can say, okay, 3 women have been impregnated.
Yeah, if there was a
and
statistically
raped in
significant
New
difference, I would
Jersey.
care. But what I'm telling you
we're
is, I can point to
increasing-
cases. I can point to
This is the same argument as, for example, if you tried to bring up like racial crime statistics as an argument for why we should have racially segregated communities, and you said how many white people being victims of black crime is it going to take for you to care, I would say, if by care you mean to be in favor of taking minority groups' rights away, and none. There's no amount that will ever be enough. Sorry. If that's your definition of caring, then there'll never be enough. And just completely bite the bullet on that, but clarify, and make sure you clarify enough the audience knows just how loaded and dishonest her question is. I feel like most of the audience, even in Big Pop fascists community at this point, were probably like, ooh, this lady's not doing a good job of arguing against the transes.
Anecdotes of cis women raping cis women in cis women's prison, like in women's prisons, yet you...
I was literally watching a clip from the other day where David Duke, back in the 80s, made the argument, how many times does a black man have to beat us up on the way home for you to care, to the interviewer? Oh yeah, no, this is literally like word for word, like Nazi, like desegregationist, like anti-civil rights movement talking points. Like literally every time this happens, it's just a repeat of when they did this last time. They have always been trying to take away rights from minorities. It's just a new group this time.
Nobody would point to that to say that women should be banned from women's prisons.
They should be put in a higher security place. And like we said earlier, there are
Exactly, that's what I'm advocating
to...
for. If there's somebody who's a threat, they should be put in a higher security place.
But it needs to first be separated by sex. It needs to be
literally
separated by sex. This is the Geneva Convention acknowledges this. The United States Constitution says no cruel and unusual punishment. This is a human rights violation.
No cruel and unusual.
No studies. She's saying the Geneva Convention bans cruel and unusual punishment, and by her standard, having a man in a woman's prison, which is what she calls it, is cruel and unusual punishment, so it's against the Geneva Convention. Like, that's literally her thought process. Not only that, but yes, she does build her morals, it seems, around what is legal and what isn't legal, or at least that's how she's arguing it. Literally incoherent thought process, incoherent ideology. Any argument she can make to justify her bigotry, it's all that it is. It's just hate. It's just hate. It's just hate. It's just hate. Oops, all hate.
Punishment, like, wait, no cruel and unusual punishment like trans women being raped in men's prisons?
That's not, like, the state ordering that.
Oh, so that's not a cruel and unusual punishment. Is being raped at 10 times the rate in men's prisons.
But again, it's still male-on-male violence, and I have empathy for that.
Well,
I don't think anybody should be hurt, but the solution is not to erase women's boundaries.
Every time you bring up something like cruel and unusual punishment, you immediately back off because you don't actually hold it as a principle. You're just using that as a mask for your anti-trans bigotry.
I would
literally
say
everything that you've brought up, from like fear of assaults to privacy violations in bathrooms. Like, every time, your principle falls apart immediately once it's shown that the empirical data disproves you on literally everything you've said, and you always jump back to something else because it's not about facts to you.
This is where you start insulting.
But I would say that putting men in that place increases the rate. So again, I don't know how many women...
The data shows it doesn't.
Let me start, because this is a relatively new phenomenon.
Because I'd already be bored at this point.
Prisons.
And the dub is already to be had.
Rapes. My assertion is that we need to stop this, or else the numbers are just going to keep increasing. You're going to see more women getting pregnant, more women being raped.
So I'd be trying to wrap it up with her getting angry.
I'm telling you that we need to stop the trans women being raped in men's prison, which is a real problem that we can justify with statistical evidence and data, but there is no data supporting your narrative, your untrue narrative, that trans women pose an extra threat to cis women. That's just not true. The data doesn't show that.
I mean, are you familiar with organizations like Keep Prisons Single Sex or Sovereign Women Speak or any organizations?
Oh yeah, they're a bunch of liars.
They're a bunch of liars. So their statistics are false, but yours are credible.
What are their statistics?
Redux Magazine does a good.
Redux? Okay.
You don't like okay, whatever. You can laugh at my stuff.
Magazine. So, for the record, for those of you guys that don't know, that list of organizations is literally a list of tabloid magazines and TERF websites and mommy blogs, is what she just listed. None of these are like institutions with scientists that are doing like peer-reviewed studies or data. The most that you will get will be a internet survey, like hosted by the website for the users to vote on with like a poll. And the most security there is to that survey to verify that it wasn't botted or misrepresented or biased is nothing. There is literally no barriers. So that is about the most you'll get as far as numbers on something from a conservative is here's a tabloid site's survey they did, and here's a magazine's op-ed, and here's a doctor who thinks that COVID was caused by demon cum. That kind of thing, you know? Nothing new. Nothing new.
Entirely biased fake news source.
Entirely okay, whatever.
You can look it up. Redux is a known liar. Here's the thing, like, my sources are like the United States Department of Justice.
Yeah, no, there's actually a really good source you can go to if you're ever looking to insta-debunk a source from one of these conservatives. What is it called? Political Bias Check, I think it's called. Political Bias Fact Check, I think it is. They fact check. It's a fact-checking site, but it also rates websites and publications based on their political bias. So there'll be a scale for truthfulness and a scale for bias and what side they're biased towards. So there's a side for, are they very far left and untruthful? Are they very far left and truthful? Are they very far right and typically truthful in their reporting? Are they very far left and typically truthful? Like that kind of thing. And so you can correlate like their bias to how truthful their reporting is and just instantly Google it. Like, okay, oh, you just listed an example? Let me look it up. Oh, it seems that's an extremely right-wing biased, heavily untruthful website known for publishing lots of lies. Here, oh, well, look, they've got examples of times they published blatant lies. Let's see if your source is on that list. You know, that you can just kind of do that. I think it's called Media Bias Fact Check.
The Pediatric Medical Journal, and then you have to cite a magazine which is a known liar. Like, that immediately shows that we are not on equal playing fields when it comes to data and evidence.
Well, I'm saying this is a new thing that women are starting to report on.
Well, it's not a, like, we have data. Like, I'm
It's
citing
not a new
I'm citing
thing.
the data from the Department of Justice.
And because of Biden, the Department of Justice has to protect gender identity.
How does Biden being in office mean they can't report data? Because I have the data right here from the DOJ.
Well, I'm talking about like his executive order. But anyway, like another point. So a man, a couple months.
Hold up. That makes no sense at all.
Well,
are
no,
you
because
still looking for the data you have?
No, I stopped so I could talk to you for a second. But I mean, I can go back to it.
I would love for you to find that data.
Well, I mean, if you're already familiar with Keep Prison Single Sex and Redux Magazine, then I don't think there's any point in trying to like.
Okay, because you know that the data's bullshit because they don't actually have data.
I can
they
go
just
find
have,
it,
like,
but I just think
I've
for the
seen
sake
those
of
magazines,
time, I don't.
All they do is talk about anecdotes. They're just like, oh, here's one case of somebody that did a bad thing. But it's like I could do the same thing about cis women and try to fearmonger about cis women in the women's prisons. But it's pointless because anecdotes are not proof. Like you can find an anecdote for really anything.
It's crazy how people have completely, it's like become ancient history now, but I still remember the famous Lauren Southern quote in her original debate with Destiny, where she kept on, like, not engaging with data, and Destiny was like, okay, I get that you've got a lot of examples of YouTube videos and a lot of anecdotes, but I'm trying to engage with data here. Do you have any data to back up what you're saying here about, like, brown people committing crimes in Western countries? And she said, well, data is the plural of anecdote. And just the entire chat just busted out laughing. And that is because that was like a famous, like, people would quote that whenever a conservative used that logic, but I never see it anymore. That was such a classic, like, example of conservative brain rot that had been immortalized as a meme. I wish people reference that more often. It's very apt.
Give Rachel a chance to respond here, Naomi.
But I mean, they have, okay, so you think Redux is all fake, whatever. But they do have dozens of reports of men hurting women in prisons because of this stuff. So I'm just wondering, like, you're saying it's not a real problem or whatever, but I'm just wondering, how many is it going to take for you to
I like
care?
how Naomi corrected her on how it's pronounced.
If there's a statistically significant difference, then we should take action about that. But there's just not. Were you listening the first time I said that?
Yeah, no, I was listening.
Okay, then why
Rachel didn't even know how to pronounce her own source.
I guess I just forgot. It's a little late for me. I don't
Okay.
usually stay up past 10. But anyway, I mean, I feel like we're going in circles. I'm trying to think of what else we could hash out here. I mean, I really don't mean to sound callous, but the solution to male on male violence is not to erase women's boundaries or to say that
a
sex
nothing
doesn't
argument.
matter or that
That is
gender
a
identity
nothing
should trump
argument.
So, like,
sex.
what is the solution to like a trans woman being raped?
I mean, put them in. I mean, I guess what they do is put them in isolation, which I don't agree with. I don't know what
Well,
the
so
perfect
what's the solution
solution
then?
is. I don't know what the perfect solution is, but I'm saying the solution is not to put
Okay,
that
so
person.
you don't have a solution.
I'm saying the solution is not to put him in a women's prison.
Well, the
That
thing
is
is,
not
if
okay.
you're actively advocating for policies which are going to make this problem worse, that are going to increase the amount of trans women that are being raped at currently 10 times the rate in men's prisons, you should have a solution for that, or else you are being wildly irresponsible and harming a minority for the sake of no empirical harms which have been demonstrated against cis women.
I am saying that there are harms against women. These things do harm women and girls,
I'm
and
talking
that's
about
my main
empirically
priority.
backed harm, not anecdotes, like actual statistical significance behind an increase in harm, which you yourself have admitted that you can't find data to support.
I mean, if you want me to take a few minutes, but you're already familiar with those magazines, so if
Right,
you've
I know,
seen
after
all
we
of
start
their
my
it
data.
doesn't show it doesn't show any kind of statistically significant difference in the amount of assault and privacy
Well,
violations.
If
in
we're
these spaces.
circular, if we are circular on this point, another women's space that was brought up that you guys only touched on briefly was women's sports. If you guys want to dive into that, that's another point of contention that you guys can dive into before we get to the closing statements.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about women's sports. I think that like sports medicine science and policies for inclusion in male and female sports is going to be a complicated and nuanced issue, even ignoring the existence of trans people. I mean, we live in a world where I hope that we can acknowledge that intersex people exist. We live in a world where there are other complex situations, such as certain medicines that people take affecting like athletic performance. There are people that were caught doping and then have gone off of that doping for years. Like, ultimately, sports medicine science is a very nuanced, complicated issue, and I trust the sports medicine science bodies to come up with the best extent of fairness and inclusion as possible in the policies they create, because there's not a perfect solution that exists for sports. And so, yeah, I think that this is another one where you kind of just have to handle it on a sports medicine science kind of basis.
Okay, I mean, I would
This
still
is the
say it
correct
comes down to
position, by the
sex,
way.
and then even
I agree.
within.
But
So
sex
you
is a
think
lot more
sports should be-
complicated than some kind of sexism.
The funny thing is, because she's so incapable of making an actual argument, she'll say something that's like not an argument, it's just a meaningless platitude, like, we need to base it off of sex. And so you can just reply, yeah, I agree. Here's how the argument you're trying to make by saying that, but you're too cowardly to actually put into words because you know I'll debunk it, is wrong, though. Anyway. And just, show that you know the argument she's actually trying to make by saying that. Metagame conservatives. You guys know what metagaming is, right? Like, you ever play, like, D&D or whatever? And it's like, you're not supposed to metagame, where you, like, acknowledge that it's a game, and that, like, it's obvious to you as the player what the right decision is here, and what you're really supposed to do is act as your character would, and roleplay. And metagaming is, like, considered cheating. In debating politics, metagaming, in my opinion, is when you internally acknowledge what is happening. You internally stop for a minute when you hear the conservatives say something like, well, I just really care about the safety of children in schools. You stop there for a moment. You have like a mind, like VATS moment, okay? Like you have debate VATS, okay? And you think, wait, I know this person doesn't actually care about protecting children. None of this person's policy prescriptions or beliefs actually coincide with that. This person just hates minorities and is trying to justify it. What do I do from here? Well, you can't just call that out because they aren't making that obvious. So instead, start attacking that position subtly while also asking questions. Ask questions like, okay, well, how would we apply this standard of preventing trans women from being in women's spaces? How would you check? Okay, well, so, well, how you would enforce the policy? I'm asking you right now. well, it would be reported, right? Be like, well, what would you be reporting? A crime? Like, the crime's already a crime, so what are you actually advocating for? It seems like you just, like, meta game the conservative. Do exactly what I'm doing now, where I'm pointing out everything she's doing and why she's doing it in the debate and say it to her, and then continue to ask her questions and force her to, round out her beliefs, like, make her beliefs more clear to you, and literally attack every vulnerability. Always be on the offensive. Always be the one asking the questions. Always be the one attacking nitpicks. Every small nitpick you can attack it. Obviously start with the strongest points, but if the debate's going to go on forever, then keep it nitpick if you have to. Always be on the offensive. Never go on the defensive with these people. Never, ever, ever even let there be a second where you're on the defensive. That is the best way to go about debating these people. All right, back to it.
Like, athletic performance is going to be a lot more nuanced and complicated than a simple binary.
I mean, I would disagree with that.
You don't think that, like different
yeah,
levels of
go
hormones
ahead.
are going to affect your sports performance?
Sure, but like women are not a hormone level, so like sex is not
Well, wait,
based just
why
on
do
your
we
hormone
separate
levels.
men's and women's sex? Why do we separate these sports by sex?
Because our whole bodies are different. It's not.
Oh,
It doesn't just
why are
come
those-
down to
why are those bodies
testosterone or
different?
estrogen. Why are they different?
Yeah.
Because of how we've developed. It starts as
Oh, and why do we develop that way?
at
It's
our
because of
chromosomes.
hormones. All of these are going to
Okay.
boil down to hormones.
Okay, but like, yeah, hormones affect your skeleton. So even if you, like, let's say you suppress your testosterone,
skeleton?
like estrogen.
It affects
That
your
doesn't change
skeleton?
hips. That doesn't change.
It does if you
how
start early
you
enough.
walk.
I don't know if you've seen the
Are you
data,
serious?
But for those that start before the
Yes,
age of
it does,
25,
but
it actually-
I mean, that's not it. Hold on, no. Hormones affect every part of your sexual development, down to like when you're in utero. Every single human starts out as female. They don't have a penis. They have like a little something, and that develops into a penis based on whether or not testosterone is introduced in utero, which is caused in large part by whether or not you have XX or XY chromosomes. But if you have intersex chromosomal distributions, then there's a high chance that your hormone distribution while you're in utero is going to be unusual, and that can result in outward unusual sexual characteristics, such as having both kinds of genitalia or having a penis, testes, and a uterus. Many intersex people go their entire lives without ever knowing, in fact. I'm sorry, but it's just the reality is more complicated than these people would let you know.
actually does affect your bone
They have baby
structure,
brain.
because the bone plates don't fuse until about the age of 25.
This is true as well.
Well-
Not only your brain isn't fully developed and your bones are not fully developed until you're about 25 years old.
I mean, but if you've still gone through male puberty from like 12 to 20, you're still going to be a lot bigger and different than like a 20-year-old woman.
Oh, time to argue. Nope. Accept that. Say, yeah, sometimes that might be the case. Obviously not always, and you're just pulling that out of your ass. That's what I'd say. But that's a perfect argument for puberty blockers. Would you like to move on to that topic? Because I imagine you're against those. Puberty blockers are the medically overwhelmingly agreed upon solution to this problem. If your concern is that the going through puberty of trans women is what makes it an issue as far as sports is concerned, why not put them on puberty blockers and then destroy every dumb argument she makes for why puberty blockers are bad? Because she can't concede that talking point. She literally can't. That completely makes her worldview fall apart.
Maybe on average, but it's really going to depend on things like your androgen sensitivity, going to depend on your natal hormone levels. Like, it really creates just, like, it's really just such a nuanced topic that I don't think that your binarized notion of sex can fully encapsulate something that's going to be fair. But I guess, like, my question for you, if the problem is, like, going through a male puberty, how about, like, a trans girl who went on puberty blockers such that she never went through a male puberty? She never went through male puberty. She never developed in that way. What would be the problem with her competing in women's sports?
Well, first of all, that person is still male, and it's still a space for females.
Why is
and
it
second of all,
why is it unfair?
well, it probably wouldn't be that unfair. That person probably be at a disadvantage because they've fucked up. Can I swear? Sorry, they've messed up their endocrine system, and their bones haven't formed properly, so
Oh.
they
You can
probably
swear.
wouldn't. Okay.
Okay, so
so they
I
wouldn't
guess
be
what you're
very
saying is-
strong.
I like how it always does come back to to a roundabout way of insulting trans people, because it's all hatred and it's all about trying to reignite hate in the hearts of people who agree with her. So to distract them from the logic that's being brought up in this debate.
Wrong.
What you're saying is it's not about fairness to you. It's about excluding trans people.
It's about a women's
Yo.
space.
Okay,
you
so
make
it's, you
the-
don't care
About
about
for women.
fairness.
Oh, yeah,
Because
okay,
at the end of the day, what
It
I
is
care
more-
about
it's-
is fairness, and that's what I'm trying
Look,
to
I'm
like
sure-
come up with a nuanced policy to best
I see
ensure
it.
fairness. But you just admitted you don't care about fairness. Like you just
It's
care about
more-
excluding trans
it's-
people.
It's fair. It's more fair for women to let them have their own sports. I'm sure that I'm stronger than some men. I'm sure that I can run faster than some men out there in the world. But that doesn't mean that men should be able to compete with women. On average, men are going to be bigger and
What if sports were meritocracy based? What if we had leagues based on your skill? So instead of it being, this is the women's league. Oh, I might have destroyed your little thing, Guyanist. I'm sorry. Hold on, I gotta place some sponges. Or I guess we have to hold on. Dolphin, no. Dolphin, get out of here. Okay, I guess you're a little structure dolphin now. Alright, I don't have any good sponges, so we're gonna have to do this the old-fashioned way, Calionist. We're gonna have to do this the old-fashioned way. Okay.
stronger than women, and that's why women have their own
Well,
separate
let's
sports
kind of start out
leagues.
just like on a more case-by-case basis. If it is a case where there is no concern about fairness because this trans girl, for example, went on puberty blockers, never went through a male puberty, why can't she compete? It seems perfectly fair.
And because that person is still male. And
Okay,
they
so you
still
don't care about fairness.
I mean, Karen
It's
is
just
sorry,
hating
excuse me,
men.
This is just once again
Fairness.
another one of these things
Males,
where
I
you're
should
going to
say.
Let me
start by
finish a
saying,
point. Let me
wait,
finish a
hold on.
point.
Voids.
I have to point out that you're once again doing the thing where you're like, I have concerns, and your concerns are supposedly about fairness. Well, then I point out an instance where the fairness issue is completely solved. You immediately jump back to, well, I just don't want trans women in these spaces. It's never about the thing that you claim it's about.
The
You're always
ultimate-
lying because at the end of the day, all you care about is your anti-trans bigotry. You don't care about the fairness.
the ultimate thing is spaces for women and girls. And I think for women and girls, it doesn't matter if they're big or strong or whatever. Sports, it's their space. It's
But
a
I thought the
women's
reason why we
sex
separated-
segregated space.
I thought the reason
And
why we
fairness
separated...
is ultimately
Hang on,
like
let
a good
let
reason.
Rachel
Let me
finish.
finish my thought, please. Fairness is like the ultimate part of it, but beneath that, it's more important that it's a space for women and girls.
Thank you.
It's their own space. It's their own leagues. And men have their own space where they can compete.
Like,
Boys
I
have
just
their
wish you
own
wouldn't lie to me
spaces.
like that. How you lie to my face like this? Like the thing is, you led with I care about fairness. We segregate
I do
sports.
care
by-
about fairness, and that's a big part of it.
Let me finish. You say that I care about segregating sports by sex because it has to deal with fairness, and then I point out that no, you actually don't care about fairness, and you acknowledge that you really don't care about fairness. To you, it's just about excluding trans people. Like, I just want you to stop lying to everybody that you care about fairness, that you care about safety, and just admit that what you really care about is excluding trans people, because on every single argument, it's been exposed that you don't care about the actual evidence of who is harmed by assault and privacy violations. You don't care about the actual evidence behind things that are fair. You just care about excluding trans people. Like, I'm sure you'd be the type of person that would say that, like, trans women should not play in women's chess leagues.
Well, okay, I'll say sure. My ultimate goal is I don't care how
Which
big
recently
or strong
got
or weak
banned.
or whatever somebody is. It should be separated
They're
by
trying
sex.
to-
So I
Right,
don't
they're
care
trying
if
to
a man-
separate
Your bigotry
chess
would cause you
leagues.
to exclude trans women from women's
Well,
chess.
they are, and they're
It's not
trying to
about
keep
fairness.
trans women out of women's chess.
Well, if it's a club that's just for girls, then it's just for girls. The
No,
boys can go
professional
play
women's
on it.
chess.
Like, I don't think
Explain
guys
how
have
it's
to
Stop
be-
unfair.
lying to everybody
I
by
don't
saying you
think-
care about
I don't
fairness
think-
because you
I'm
don't.
not lying. To acknowledge that for the most part, men are going to be bigger and stronger than girls,
Well, wait, hold
and
up.
it's more fair for
It's
them.
lying
Let me finish
to
a
say
thought.
that I am wanting to exclude trans women
How
because
does being
of fairness.
bigger and
The
stronger
truth
than
is, you want
girls
to
affect
exclude
you in
trans women
chess?
because you are
Because
an
they're
anti-trans
men.
It's a
bigot that
mind
wants to
game.
exclude trans
Because
people.
they're men, and women should have their own spaces separate from men. Even if the man is slow and weak and gentle and nice, he's still a man and doesn't get to come into the women's spaces.
Right, like the problem
That's
with this debate
ultimately
is that
what
on,
it is.
the problem with
That's
this debate
that's
is
the
that
bottom
on
layer
literally
truth.
any issue. Thank you for
She's
admitting
trying.
it.
That's her
Like, the
big.
problem with this
That's her
debate is on
big
literally
epic
any issue we discuss, I'm going
That's
to
her
point
big
out
epic,
that the concern you raise is completely bad
argument
faith
there.
and disingenuous, and that at the end of the
They're
day,
male,
all you
and
care
they're
about
not supposed
is
to
excluding
be
trans
there.
people and your
Yeah.
anti-trans bigotry, and we can just go in circles on literally every topic, because that's what we've done
Yeah.
on every topic. We've shown that all of your supposed concerns are bullshit and debunked, and then you immediately fall back on, well, I'm bigoted against trans people, and that's what we're going to do on every topic we discuss.
I mean, we probably are going to go around in circles on every topic. But yeah, I mean, my ultimate goal is that I think places for women and girls should be based on sex. That's the ultimate truth. That's the ultimate bottom. And on top of
The
that,
ultimate
it is
truth.
for safety. It is for fairness. But
you don't
underneath
care about
that,
those.
the truth is, but I care more importantly about sex, and that women and girls should have their own spaces.
You care
based
about
on
your bigotry,
sex.
not about fairness. You're proving my point again. Thank you.
And thank you for making my point that advocating for women and girls is seen as bigotry. Caring about sex-based rights and spaces is bigotry. Thank you for making that point too.
Caring
I don't
about
think-
white
I don't think
people
we're
is
gonna
labeled
go
as bigotry.
involved here.
I just care about the
So
white
I'm gonna move
race.
into
Why do
closing
people say
statements. We're
that's
gonna wrap the
bigoted?
debate up right about here anyway.
What do you
And
mean when
then
I say
we'll go to
bigoted
callers
things,
and
but
super
dog
chats.
whistle it as if I'm
No,
some kind of
Naomi,
activist? People
as
call
Rachel
me
went
out.
First, I'm going to give Rachel the last word. You can go ahead with your closing statement. I'm
I-
going to give you 7 minutes.
I
No,
thought you said
sorry.
that
Giving Rachel
she
the
was gonna
last
go
word.
first with the closing statement.
Well, no, she opened.
Okay,
correct?
sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
think
she's
it's
gonna
been
close last.
pretty clearly demonstrated throughout this entire debate that every time that Rachel comes into the topic with some kind of concern or some kind of worry, she'll claim that it's about, the safety of women. She'll claim that it's about fairness. And then I will debunk everything she says with evidence, with data, with statistics, which she will then either deny that they're real, claim that she's seen some kind of weird turf magazine that goes against what the Department of Justice says, what the peer-reviewed literature says, just showing how literally delusional she is about the reality of the world. And then once it's been
And all
shown
these
that her
people.
concern is completely fake, bad faith, she'll immediately jump back to her anti-trans bigotry, how she wants to exclude trans women, and forget trans men because she hasn't thought about them either. So yeah, I mean, really, at the end of the day, Rachel is an anti-trans bigot, and her trying to advocate for, the quote-unquote rights of women and girls is not that. She cares more about hurting trans people, and has time and time again showed that she is okay with trans people being raped, with trans people being assaulted, and that she doesn't think that it's her problem to worry about. And with all of the little time and effort she has thought about this and put into this, it is insane that she runs a political action committee dedicated to attacking trans people's rights. A time in this country where trans people are facing an unprecedented legislative assault against our rights, against our safety, and she's just adding fuel onto the fire. And yeah, I think I've shown pretty clearly that she is bad faith, and
True.
that none of the things which she supports are backed up by any kind of evidence or data. And so, that's that.
Okay, well, thank you for that closing statement. And then over to you, Rachel. You have 7 minutes on the clock.
Sure.
Go
So
ahead when you're
I'll
ready.
just end with, again, my basic argument is that the laws should protect sex and not gender identity. And it's the ultimate truth that male and female exist, we're different, and women should have their own spaces separated
The
from
ultimate
men.
truth.
And it is a fairness concern, it is a safety concern, but ultimately it's just truth. And
when she says ultimate, it's serious.
if I'm an anti-trans
It's a serious
bigot, then
word.
I would say Naomi is just an autogonophile and a man, and that's my final statement.
Rachel unfortunately had
Okay, there we go. That was the ending of it. That was the ending. That was literally the ending. When I hit pause, it immediately clicked replay. Huh. Nice. So she says if I was a bigot, I'd say, and then uses that as an excuse to say the thing that she wanted to say. That's cool. That's a nice little sneaky, unironic sneaky debate tactic. Saying, if I wanted to insult you, I would say, and then say the insult that you want to say. Very clever. Nobody picked up on that one. That wasn't blaringly obvious. Yeah, Naomi just straight up bent her over and just gave her a nice paddling. That was fun to watch. I always love seeing a transphobe get bullied. They really are just some of, the worst people. And it's not just because they're, wrong and they're attacking, a minority group. It's that they've particularly focused their attacks on children. Like, the primary threats at this, like, or the primary group they're threatening right now are not trans adults, it's trans kids. So it's like they've literally gotten to the point where they are leveraging a political attack against children, like a heavily funded one, and like it's going to go down in history as one of the most horrifically disgusting things a political group has ever done. Like, when you really think about what they're doing right now, it is truly demonic, and seeing these people just get fucking wrecked is very cathartic for me. So yeah, I like to see this kind of shit, and I like to do this kind of shit. We gotta do some more transphobe debates in the future.